Chapter 41. Ida tossed and turned in bed, Snape's words looping through her mind. He had hated her wandering the castle at night more than any professor had a right to, or so she had believed. The night she first roamed the corridors and stumbled on Professor Fooley's secret, it had been Snape who distracted Fooley and kept her safe. Thinking it over now, it looked less like petty interference and more like protection. Snape's figure grew, in her imagination, a little taller. He was still sharp-tongued and insufferable, but he had protected her more than once. In her private rehearsals of the past, Ida began to reconstruct his actions. Without quite admitting it, her hatred cooled from a white-hot thing to a duller annoyance. On Sunday, Gryffindor resumed its hunt, though in a far more restrained and discreet way. They no longer posted sentries all over the castle, but the thief left no trace. During dinner, the older students grumbled that the culprit was too cautious to be a Gryffindor, even suggesting it must be someone who had already graduated. They boasted about how a true Gryffindor would face danger straight on, yet wouldn't be foolish enough to walk into a trap. Mostly it was posturing for lack of success. For the next week, Ida obeyed Snape. She stayed in the dormitory. When she did go out, it was only with the twins or with Angelina and Alicia. When she stopped roaming on her own, Snape stopped summoning her. Even in potions class, she was left alone. It was the easiest potions week she'd ever had. No cutting remarks aimed at her, no deliberate trouble. For the rest of the school, it was an ordinary week. No terrifying attacks, no petty mysteries, and even the dreadful ghostly weather eased. For Professor Fooley, however, it was the unluckiest week of his life. On Monday, a student accidentally set his robe on fire. The robe was ruined, but Fooley was unharmed. On Tuesday, he was nicked in the right leg and carried to the hospital wing, where another bump to the head from a careless student made him faint. Madame Pomfrey treated him carefully, and he was discharged on Thursday, apparently recovered. But less than 20 minutes after leaving, he tripped on the staircase and tumbled down from an upper landing. He was back in the hospital wing in short order. If it had been Professor Gerard, who was in his 70s and had been badly injured in an accident last April that left him at St. Mungo's, that fall might have been fatal. Students whispered that the curse on the Defense Against the Dark Arts post had begun to take effect. Some prayed to Merlin for Fooley's recovery. Others, less charitable, started to speculate on when he would be forced out. The Weasley twins invested all their spare coins on a bet that he'd last until June. If he did, they'd cash in. March arrived. Spring crept into Hogwarts, and Fooley was discharged again, returning to his duties with a stoic air. Many pupils cheered, others fretted. Inside the castle, people worried about how long Fooley could hold on. Outside, the wizarding world worried about who would be the next Minister of Magic. Millicent Bagnold had announced her resignation and would step down once a successor was chosen. Dumbledore's chair at the head of the Great Hall was empty more often these days. Besides heading the school, he had many other responsibilities and was away attending meetings. During one of his absences, another theft was reported. This time, Slytherin had been visited. The lakeside dormitories had been entered. Neither the creatures beneath the water nor the Bloody Baron had seen anything. The mysterious visitor, nicknamed Mr. Thief, had replaced Fooley as the school's most talked-about subject. Hufflepuff and Gryffindor were not spared either. Mr. Thief used two different methods. His Hufflepuff break-in was nearly undetected and succeeded only for being noticed by a vigilant house elf. His entry into Gryffindor, however, reverted to a clumsier approach. Students returned from a ransacked Gryffindor common room and immediately informed Professor McGonagall. She calmed them, halted the immediate plan of young lions to turn the castle upside down, and questioned the fat lady, who had, to everyone's surprise, been unaware her portrait doorway had been breached at all. Fred and George loudly announced that Mr. Thief had taken their homework notebooks, and McGonagall, unimpressed, gave them both detention. The twins endured it with no visible remorse. The thief had been provocatively arrogant, entering rooms without taking anything, as if to carve, "I was here" on the walls. That behavior rallied the houses against him. Pupils rigged traps and alarms to guard their common rooms. Regrettably, many of those student-made contraptions failed in spectacular ways and injured classmates, filling the hospital wing. Even Professor Fooley, usually enjoying swift treatment, found himself waiting in the corridor. Still, the unity of the four houses in a common hatred was a rare sight. Compared to the twins, Ida's quiet correction of her ways was commendable. She had stayed put. She did not follow the twins to scout the edges of the forbidden forest. But she was still called on by Snape from time to time to help prepare materials for potions. A surprising amount of the students' potion ingredients passed through her hands, and the more she worked with Snape, the bolder she grew. She began to ask questions. Snape answered, always with the same sour expression, as if to say, "How can you not know this, or is your brain the size of a raisin?" Facing that look so often hardened her. His barbed replies no longer unhinged her. Under his tutelage, she improved. Snape himself seemed surprised by how compliant she'd become. Threatening her with points felt like ancient history. Days slipped by, mostly quiet, with only the occasional ripple of trouble. Before she knew it, the twins' birthday was approaching. On April 1st, 1978, a pair of twins came into the world. Born on April Fool's Day, mischief seemed an innate talent for them. Their arrival felt like it had been meant to bring laughter. Their names were Fred and George Weasley. Today was April 1st, 1990, and Fred and George were celebrating their 12th birthday. Charlie and Percy had both prepared gifts for the twins. Mrs. Weasley had made a birthday cake in addition to presents. Even Bill, whom Ada had never met, had sent a gift from Egypt. Everyone who knew the twins wished them a happy birthday. The Weasleys were fixtures of cheerful chaos in Gryffindor. Whatever house points they cost, everyone still loved them. Ada hadn't gone to Zonko's to buy something ready-made. Instead, she'd prepared a Quidditch-themed present, a small booklet compiling classic beater tactics from famous matches and insights from well-known beaters who'd played the position. It was exactly the sort of thing Fred and George loved. The twins, who'd always fancied being Gryffindor beaters, couldn't put it down. That evening, Charlie and his friend Rupert had gone down to the kitchens. The house elves, hospitable as ever, sent up trays piled with food and drink. Between Mrs. Weasley's cake and the kitchen feast, the twins had a proper little birthday party. Ada and Angelina sat together, eating cake in small bites. Alicia, who'd been going on about dieting all week, had a slice and was devouring it. Ada liked Mrs. Weasley's cooking. A house elf might have been faster or neater, but Mrs. Weasley's food carried the taste of home, the taste of a mother. "Alicia, don't eat anymore. Your broomstick won't be able to carry you," Lee Jordan teased, dark-skinned and loud enough to be heard over everything. He worried that if Alicia kept stuffing herself, Angelina wouldn't get much of the cake, though he wouldn't say that to Ada, who was eating just as enthusiastically. Alicia puffed up and shoved a fist into the air. "What's it to you?" she snapped. Ada's roommates had a habit of throwing up their fists at the slightest provocation. It was part pantomime, part bravado. Lee ignored her and cut a slice for Angelina. "Angelina, have some more," he said solicitously. Angelina, embarrassed and unsure whether to accept, hesitated. Ada saw the awkwardness and intercepted the cake. "Thanks, Lee. I'll take it," she said. It let Angelina off the hook, saved Lee from feeling rebuffed, and pleased Ada. 3 problems solved at once. The twins returned after the party had been underway for a while, slumping back into their usual place among friends. "I saw you bringing cake to Angelina," George grinned as he plonked down beside Lee. She was too mortified to refuse. Lee's defenses crumbled. "Mortified," he echoed, and soon Fred, George, and Lee were roughhousing in the way only close friends do. Even Angelina, still a little awkward, started to laugh. The party didn't last much later than it needed to. It was private, after all. When most of the students had gone to bed, Ada and the twins still lingered in the common room. "All right, what do you two want to do now?" Ada asked. The twins' earlier hints had been obvious. This was the part where they got her to stay. "It's our birthday today, isn't it?" Fred said. "Yes, so what were we doing before? Celebrating Professor Fooley's readmission to the hospital." Ada shot back. "We have special privileges today," George said. He phrased it like a hint. Ada knew better than to take his meaning at face value. "Tell us, what do you want to do?" "We want to go to the Forbidden Forest," they whispered together. Ada raised an eyebrow. "Then go. I'm not stopping you." "Don't dodge the point," Fred said. "You know what we mean. This." Ada didn't really want to go. April nights weren't warm, and the forest had a reputation. We want to go see the Forbidden Forest, so we need a bodyguard, George added, blunt and proud. Ada stood up and started for the dormitory. Goodbye, I'm not seeing you off, she said. Don't you have any curiosity? Fred prodded. Are you content to listen to Snape and sit cooped up in the dormitory all night? We need you. The twins grabbed her, stubborn and suddenly earnest. They knew her well. First, they teased out her curiosity, then they roused her competitive streak, and finally, most effective of all, they appealed to her as friends. Ada's resolve slipped. Fine, but bring the Marauder's map. I don't want to get caught. She went back to the dormitory to rest a little before they left. Later, after the Gryffindor common room had emptied and the portrait of the fat lady had settled, Ada and the twins met again. Under the cover of a disillusionment charm, the three slipped out. The fat lady muttered in her sleep, none the wiser. Guided by the Marauder's map, they avoided Filch and Mrs. Norris and crept out of the castle. The night air hit Ada like a slap. It was biting. She pressed herself close behind the twins and let them take the lead. Hagrid's hut was dark. Fang didn't bark. The edge of the Forbidden Forest lay ahead, its trees towering and quiet, branches whispering like dry bones. They didn't go far at first. They liked adventure, but not unnecessary danger, staying around the forest's rim. The animal noises from deeper inside were eerie, but the three of them had wands lit, 3 small lumos lights and a pool of bright moonlight. Fred, walking at the front, halted. This is as far as we've ever gone, he admitted. So you don't actually know what else is in there? George sounded excited and a little nervous. Not yet, Fred said, but we won't stop here for good. Both twins looked back at Ada. Since you came with us, let's go a little deeper. They pushed on, wands bobbing, Ada alert for anything that might happen. The trees thickened and the moonlight thinned until only the cone of light from their wands cut through the darkness. The deeper they went, the more the forest felt like a mouth closing around them. What people fear is rarely the dark itself, but the unknown filled by it. The farther they walked, the louder the animal cries became, and the sound of wind through branches grew sharp and menacing. Ada wanted to stop. She noticed spiders on the forest floor getting larger, some as big as a human palm and larger ones still. Let's stop here, she said. We should go back. Her gaze kept drifting toward the forest's depths, a cold premonition sitting on her chest. Her instincts for danger were usually right. Fred agreed. Let's head back. It's too dark. We've already gone far enough for tonight, George said, glancing once toward the deep trees. They had only taken a few steps when they heard scuttling, a rapid rustle from close by. Fred, George, watch out. Something's coming, Ada warned, magnifying the light from her wand and pointing it toward the sound. The beam revealed what was charging them, a swarm of giant spiders. The smallest were the size of wash basins. Some were much larger. They came like a black tide across the leaf-strewn ground. Run, Ada shouted. She didn't think these spiders were merely wandering by. They surged toward the trio with frightening speed. Impedimenta, impedimenta, reducto. Ada flung spells out as fast as she could. She even thought, if things got desperate, of casting a huge incendio. She wouldn't have minded burning a patch of the forest if it saved them. The impediment jinxes slammed into the nearest spiders like hitting a wall, but other spiders simply clambered over the ones that fell. The twins ran and kept swinging their wands, felling dead branches and heaving them behind them to slow the advancing swarm. I can't believe there are spiders this big in the Forbidden Forest. I've never heard of it, Fred shouted as he cast another spell. Do you think Hagrid's been raising them? George shouted back, half joking. Sounds like something he'd do. Don't even say that. It's possible, Ada panted. It didn't seem an odd thought. Hagrid kept unusual creatures. If anyone could turn the forest into a nursery for huge arachnids, it would be him. They ran without daring to stop, sprinting toward the tree's edge. The giant spiders thundered behind them, their 8 massive legs and razor-sharp fangs gleaming in the moonlight. When they reached the edge of the Forbidden Forest, the spiders didn't follow them out, but they didn't leave either. Instead, the arachnids circled anxiously near the border, as though debating whether to pursue the fleeing snack. Finally, the pack retreated a short distance and watched, unwilling to let go, as Ada and the twins disappeared into the distance. Where they had passed, they left a grim trail of severed limbs and torn remains. Only when they could clearly see Hagrid's hut did the three of them finally relax. Breathless, they bent over, hands on knees, gulping cold night air. "Why is it that every time we go anywhere, something terrible happens?" Ada panted. "I don't know," the twins chorused, their heads shaking in unison. They were tired, but not as wrecked as Ada. The physical difference between the sexes showed. "It's not our first time in the Forbidden Forest," Fred said, "but it's the first time we've seen something like that." George added, "When you two go together, nothing happens, but when I join in, trouble follows. Is it my fault?" Ada laughed, the sound hoarse. "Next time something like that happens, please don't call me. I value my life too much to put up with that kind of fright." She shoved her hands into her pockets and took another shivering breath. "You'll get used to being scared," the twins said, trying to sound comforting, though Ada found their tone more teasing than soothing. "Who's there?" Hagrid's deep voice cut through the night, accompanied by a bark. The twins tugged the still gasping Ada and began to run again. Pulled along, Ada's breaths came out like a battered bellows. Eventually, they reached the castle and stepped into the warm glow of the grounds. Fred checked the Marauder's map for Filch's whereabouts. Ada kept breathing hard, and George stroked Ada's back until her breathing evened out. As they walked toward the common room, George chuckled. "Fred, imagine we caught one of those spiders from the forest and gave it to Ron." "That'd be perfect," Fred said with mock solemnity. "One the size of a wash basin should do. Nothing too big to hurt him." Ada's heart sank. "Give Ron a giant spider? What are you two thinking?" she said. "Please be human. Are you sure Ron won't try to kill you?" "It's our fault he's afraid," Fred said. "We did that to him." "Then as big brothers we must fix it," George declared pompously. "We're just helping little Rony overcome his fear." Ada wanted to protest. She hadn't suggested the idea of overcoming fear by force, even if she'd mentioned the theory once, but she bit it back and listened as the twins continued to argue in favor of their prank. When she asked, half joking, whether they'd do the same to Ginny, Fred looked offended. "Ginny? Never! That's our sister!" The unspoken rule that sisters were off limits earned Ron an involuntary 3 seconds of pity from Ada. Exhausted, Ada fell into bed and slept like a stone that night. The next day, Hagrid walked into the castle, and the three of them greeted him awkwardly. Hagrid didn't seem to notice their discomfort. Instead, he asked the twins, worried, "You two haven't been in the Forbidden Forest recently, have you?" "No, you told us not to go," they said quickly, trying to sound innocent. Good," Hagrid said, relieved. Ada, who hadn't been suspected, asked, "Hagrid, is something wrong?" "Someone's been breaking into the forest," Hagrid said, low enough to sound like a whisper, but still loud enough to carry. "And last night, too." "Fred, George, the Forbidden Forest's been restive lately. You mustn't go there." Ada glanced at the twins, then asked, "Has anything happened in the forest recently?" Hagrid looked around at passing students, lowered his voice, and said, "Someone went in last week, and a lot of animals were harmed. Yesterday, somebody broke in again. Many of Aragog's children were killed." Ada's stomach dropped. She didn't know who had entered the forest the week before, but she had been there yesterday. She had run into those huge, playful spiders, Hagrid's pets, and things had gotten out of hand. The realization settled over her like lead. "I shouldn't be telling you this," Hagrid added, shepherding them toward the Great Hall, "but stay well away from the Forbidden Forest for a while. Dumbledore's been busier than usual this year. That's why a few of these idiots think they can make trouble at Hogwarts." Dumbledore sat in his chair at the head table, looking as calm and amiable as ever, talking with Professor McGonagall. He had again refused to stand in the Minister for Magic's election, which, according to Hagrid, had driven some of the darker folk into mischief. With Dumbledore's presence back at Hogwarts, the worst of the worry seemed to ease. Quidditch would be resuming soon. Gryffindor had a match on Saturday, and Charlie had been drilling the team. Fred and George were there as sparring partners, and Ada usually went along to cheer. But on Friday, she was absent from practice. After potions, she had been held behind. Snape hadn't merely quizzed her off topic anymore. This time, he'd singled her out until she almost wished she'd never sat down for class. When they finally left, Ada found a mountain of written work waiting for her. Snape didn't even brew in front of her tonight. He sat at his desk, nose in a book, and the two of them passed a silent competition in which whoever spoke first had already lost. Around 8 o'clock, Ada finished, stuffed away her equipment, and asked, "Professor, may I go?" Snape nodded once. She should have left immediately. She was starving, but there were things gnawing at her that she wanted to hear from him. "Professor," she said, tying her hair into a ponytail so it wouldn't get in the way, "was it Weasley who attacked Daniel?" "It's none of your business," Snape said without looking up. "A man forced his way into the common rooms of the four houses, didn't he?" she pressed. "That's not for you to worry about." Snape finally looked at her, then lowered his head again. "Your self-righteousness will be the thing that gets you into trouble." Before Ada could answer, Snape called in a sharp, impatient voice, "Winnie!" A house elf appeared as if from nowhere, bowing so low her long nose nearly scraped the dungeon floor. The elf looked at Snape and then at Ada. "Winnie, send her back," Snape ordered. 44. Defense against the Dark Arts. Ada, having failed to get anything useful from Snape, had no choice but to leave the dungeon classroom, a small house elf trailing respectfully at her heels. Snape watched her go, then slipped out of the underground room himself and headed up toward the 8th floor of the castle. He felt he ought to have a long talk with Dumbledore. Ada walked ahead, the house elf Winnie following dutifully. Ada turned to her. "Winnie, how long have you been at Hogwarts?" Winnie looked up, her round tennis ball eyes blinking. "Miss, Winnie has been at Hogwarts since she was born. 11 years, miss." "Has Professor Snape always been like this?" Ada asked. Winnie bowed her large head and spoke almost apologetically. "Miss, Winnie knows nothing of Mr. Snape's affairs. Winnie only does the cleaning." "You can't blame yourself," Ada said. "Snape is impossible to read. If only he were like Hagrid, he'd answer straight away and save us guessing." Winnie snorted softly. "Mr. Hagrid makes such a mess of the castle, miss." They reached the common room. Winnie set a tray piled with food and a pitcher of juice before Ada bowed and slipped away. Saturday brought Gryffindor's Quidditch match. The common room emptied into a sea of scarlet banners and shouting faces. The stands shook with noise as Gryffindor supporters cheered. Ada and the Weasley twins shoved into the crowd, shouting and whooping with everyone else. The game was a roller coaster, thrilling from start to finish. Under Charlie's leadership, Gryffindor's offense flowed smoothly. Charlie lived up to his captaincy. His own skill brought him scores, his presence opened chances for teammates, and he marshaled the whole squad into a single, coordinated unit. Wood, the keeper, was superb. He parried a string of difficult shots from Ravenclaw and kept Gryffindor's goal intact. Thanks to him and the rest of the team, Gryffindor held their lead. After 2 hours of frantic play, their seeker finally caught the golden snitch, and Gryffindor won. The stands erupted. The students stamped and whooped. The sturdy benches survived the onslaught. Professor McGonagall, usually austere, clenched her fists and joined in the cheering. The victorious players were swarmed as they returned to the castle, surrounded by jumping, laughing classmates. In the boisterous parade back to the castle, the kitchens were almost ransacked. House elves bowed and smiled as the little lions departed, laden with plates. Despite the celebrations, Ada's mind kept drifting back to Weasley. He'd been in poor health lately, and Ada watched his comings and goings closely, not out of concern so much as suspicion. All her doubts seemed to lead to him. The timing of several incidents made him look guilty. After Weasley stopped prowling the castle, the Ravenclaw theft occurred. When Slytherin was robbed in March, Weasley had already left the hospital and could have done it. When Hufflepuff and Gryffindor were visited by an uninvited intruder, Weasley had been back in the school hospital, which made that set of events at least plausible as an alibi. But Ada knew things about Weasley others did not, so to her those gaps didn't clear his name. They deepened her worry. His injuries had not been severe enough to stop him, and an accomplished wizard like Weasley would surely have means she couldn't imagine. What she didn't know was who attacked Daniel or who had actually broken into the Forbidden Forest. That was why she had tried talking to Snape, but Snape had offered nothing. For now, Ada had to rely on her own observations, and she focused them on Weasley, the most suspicious figure in her mind. She hadn't run to Dumbledore, the Ministry, or the Prophet. Suspicion was not the same as accusation. It didn't need proof. These days, Fooly kept a low profile. She barely saw him except during defense against the dark arts. Ada wished the Marauder's map would log movements over time instead of only showing the present. But the map could not grant that wish, and she could not watch it around the clock. If Fooly moved when Ada's eyes were elsewhere, she would have no evidence. In defense against the dark arts that afternoon, Ada pretended to read while her attention flicked repeatedly to Fooly on the podium. He looked pallid and worn, his once handsome face drawn and haggard from constant injuries and lack of rest. Since a student had accidentally injured him, all practical lessons were canceled. Wands, though not forbidden outright, were effectively useless in his class now. From the podium, he read straight from the textbook, word for word, an eerie slide toward the flat, monotonous style of Professor Binns. Recent lessons had been either canceled or perfunctory. Many complained, but his battered state softened almost everyone's hearts. People were flesh and blood. No one wanted to heap pressure on someone already having terrible luck, so the class had become dull and lifeless. Below, the students tended to their own things. Some slept, some did homework, others daydreamed. Fooly read on like a merciless machine. The two sides ignored each other. His voice wasn't nearly as soporific as Binns's, so the sleep here was less deep, but the effect was the same. No one disturbed the teacher, and he was left to his books. When class ended, the pale Fooly called after Ada as she rose to leave. "Miss Trist, wait a moment." Ada started, almost expecting Snape to be the one to call her back. She turned. "Professor Fooly? Yes? Come with me for a moment. I need your help," he said, walking into a small side room off the classroom. Ada hesitated. She didn't know what he had in mind and wondered briefly whether he had noticed her snooping. But since he called her out in front of everyone, he probably wouldn't do her any harm. She followed, keeping her face calm so he couldn't read it. Fooly moved to a bookshelf and pulled out 2 volumes. "I borrowed these from the library, but haven't been able to return them because of my health," he said. "You go to the library often. Could you take them back for me?" "No problem, Professor," Ada said, taking the books. "Please take care of yourself," she added, slipping on an easy expression of concern. "Everyone's rooting for you." "Thank you. I will be careful," Fooly replied with a small smile. "My work isn't finished yet. I can't give up." "Is there anything else?" Ada asked, hugging the books to her chest. Fooly sank into a chair and gave a weak shake of his head. "No, you can go." As she reached the door, he called after her, softer now. "I heard you've been wandering the castle a lot recently." Ada felt a cold prickle at the base of her neck. She kept her voice steady. "At the time, most of Gryffindor was exploring, so I just went along with them." "I'm not blaming you," Fooly said. "You want to do something for the school. Just be careful, and don't get lost returning those books." 45. Resign. Ida walked out of Defense Against the Dark Arts feeling a fresh edge of fear. A few offhand words from the gaunt Professor Fooly still left her with a weighty unease. "What did Fooly want with you?" Fred asked, waiting by the classroom door. "Don't tell me. After Snape, you've offended another professor? Best not to provoke Fooly right now." George took the book from Ida and dropped it into her backpack. No, I'm not that good at offending people like Professor Snape," Ida said, pointing to the book George had shoved into her bag. "Fooly just asked me to help return it to the Hogwarts library." "Right, given his condition, he should move around as little as possible," Fred said. "We're all rooting for him to hold on until June," George added. If anyone in school wanted Professor Fooly to stay healthy, it was the twins. "I think it's pretty risky," Ida muttered inwardly, wishing Fooly would leave Hogwarts and take his suspicions with him. She felt exposed. They walked straight to the library and returned the book Fooly had borrowed. Ida leafed through the 2 volumes out of curiosity. They were both ordinary history of magic texts, then headed back to the dormitory to think. She had never seen herself as someone who manipulated others. Before coming here, she'd been an ordinary person. After graduation, most of her life had been spent sick in bed. She hadn't had to maneuver like this. McGonagall had outplayed her already, and that had made clear how much farther she had to go. That was why she'd been so careful around Fooly, no conspicuous behavior, no rule-breaking in his presence. Yet someone who'd come to Hogwarts with a purpose still regarded her as suspicious. Ada decided she needed to be extra careful. Any action that broke school rules had to stop, and she absolutely could not give Fooly any more reasons to doubt her. She also couldn't be left alone. At first, she'd worried she would end up like Daniel, isolated and vulnerable, but she realized that being a likely target made her vigilance sharper. As long as she didn't panic and didn't give Fooly an opening, she would probably be safe. He couldn't very well attack her in front of everyone, could he? So she settled into normalcy, attend classes when needed, appear at the library on time, act like an ordinary first year, perhaps a bit more curious, but not strikingly different. With classmates always around, she would be less exposed and less likely to stir suspicion. Still, Fooly's health declined. In mid-April, he was in the hospital wing again. This time he'd broken a rib sneezing. He shuttled between his office and Madame Pomfrey's care so often it seemed he might collapse from some new mishap at any moment. Even with him barely able to stand, Ida didn't relax. This was a race she had to run. She'd taken the lead and only needed to hold out until the curse did its work. Persevere. Perseverance is victory. By mid-April, the ministry had its new Minister for Magic, Cornelius Fudge, head of the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, officially took office. Rumor had it Dumbledore had backed him, but ministerial politics didn't much concern the students. What did spread quickly, however, was the news from inside Hogwarts. Benedict Fooly, professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts, had resigned. The affable, charismatic professor couldn't withstand the curse's toll. Frequent injuries had broken his resolve to keep teaching. He submitted his resignation to Dumbledore, who accepted it. Within an hour, the hospital wing corridor was overflowing with girls bearing flowers and gifts, coming to say goodbye to their once idol. Even though his teaching had faltered in recent months, his earlier popularity and the tragic arc of his year had driven their maternal instincts into overdrive. Madame Pomfrey shooed them away for his own rest, and the gifts were left piled in front of the hospital wing door. Ida hummed when she entered the common room. She'd run into Fooly's fan club on the way back from the library and learned of his resignation. Though he hadn't yet left Hogwarts, it felt like the end of something. For no particular reason, she felt lighter, able to eat an extra steak at lunch. She found Fred and George looking miserable. The usually cheerful twins were stone-faced, their shoulders slumped. "What's wrong with you two?" Ida asked. "Why the long faces?" They reacted in perfect synchronization, hands over their faces, then heads lifted at a 45-degree angle. Ida peered, no tears. All theatrics, apparently. She sat down opposite them. "Tell me, I'll help you figure it out." "Fooly resigned," Fred said flatly. "We lost," George echoed. "Oh, so it's big after all," Ida said, having braced for something worse. Fred leaned forward, eyes fierce. "It's not the same, completely different," he snapped. "We're ruined. We saved all year." George wailed, collapsing into the armchair. Ida tried to be practical. "Money you can earn back. Don't take it so hard." "Easy for you to say," Fred muttered. "If it were you, you'd be even sadder," George added, knowing Ida's thriftiness well. To her, a galleon wasn't just currency. It mattered. "Fooly's still in the hospital wing. You might be able to get past Madame Pomfrey's defenses and see him." Ida's suggestion, half joke, half bad advice, lit them up. "You're a genius," Fred cried. George grabbed her hand dramatically. "From today on, you're our Merlin." No, I was only joking. Do you really think you can persuade him?" Ida tried to pull her hand free. Persuading him to stay would be dangerous. "We have to try. This is our last chance," they said together, springing to their feet and dashing for the door before she could finish begging them not to. Ida settled back with a book, expecting them to return empty-handed so they could all go eat. Not long after, the twins came back, collapsed and completely defeated. "How are you back already?" she asked without looking up. "We didn't even make it out of the tower," George said weakly. "We can't ask him to stay and wait to die, can we?" Fred sighed. The power of the Defense Against the Dark Arts curse was obvious. No one could be expected to keep that job for a full year. Asking Fooly to stay would be asking him to risk himself. Ida closed her book. "Let's think about lunch instead. It'll cheer you up." "We're shattered. The world's gray," Fred moaned. "Can't see any light. Life is meaningless." George added, Then I'll show you the light of the world. Want to hear my plan? Ida said. Fred perked up slightly. Are you going to pay us back for our losses? No way. She'd split a nut in half before she'd give it away, George joked. Every copper nut is tied to her ribs. Ida didn't have a Gringotts vault full of galleons, so she'd always been careful with money. So do you want to hear the plan or not? She asked, ready to distract them from their gloom with something practical and harmless. 46. Tell the truth. Of course we want to hear, Fred said. Why wouldn't we? George's ears pricked up at the same time. The twins spoke in unison, different words, same meaning. They'd latch onto any scrap of gossip. Ada gave them a small beckoning gesture, and Fred and George leaned closer. Ada whispered, Do you remember the times you asked me if I was all right? I remember. First time was after History of Magic. You looked like Filch had hung you from the rafters all night. Fred exaggerated. Ada flicked him hard on the forehead. Not that time, she snapped. Even if I were hung up and thrashed, I wouldn't be ill. Was it the one in October? George thought a moment. You were a mess then. People even said you might have sleepwalked into the Black Lake. George got the same flick on the forehead. Ada nodded. Yes, that night I was out walking the castle and I ran into. Fred and George both put on expressions that said, Really, Ada? The twins had always assumed her first night walk had been with them. Apparently not. Ada ignored their faces and continued. I ran into Professor Snape and Fooley. They were talking about something secret. The twins' faces changed. This sounded serious. From their conversation, I realized Fooley hadn't come to Hogwarts by accident, Ada said quietly. He was looking for something, behind Dumbledore's back, something that could change the wizarding world. Behind Dumbledore's back, Fred's brain went into overdrive. He lowered his voice. Could it be? Is it connected to you-know-who? George finished, his voice dropping so low the word felt dangerous. For a moment, both brothers actually looked frightened. Ada shook her head. I don't know. I got spotted and didn't hear the rest. Professor Snape discovered you then? Fred asked. He didn't expose me, Ada said. He distracted Fooley long enough for me to slip away. Since then, I've been watching Fooley. That was the first time, George said. What about the second? Oh, Daniel Bell. The twins said the name together. Ada nodded. After I heard a student had been attacked, I wondered whether it had anything to do with Fooley or the thing he was searching for. Now I understand why you were so worried about those attacks, Fred said. We even thought you were worried about your health. Ada looked at the twins with a helpless expression. You two know a lot, apparently. Not really. They heard the tease in her tone and tried to dodge it. It's Lee Jordan. You know how he is about Angelina. After that, everything calmed down for a while, so I put it aside, Ada said. After the Christmas break, you found the Marauders map, and I borrowed it to keep an eye on Fooley. And what did you see? I saw him walking through almost the entire castle at night, right up until the theft happened, Ada said. You mean the person who stole our homework might have been Fooley? The twins were quick to seize on the idea. These are only my suspicions, no proof, Ada warned. But he had motive, time, and the ability. I don't think Fooley is a weakling who would cause trouble right under Dumbledore's nose and get away with it. He tested you the last time he kept you alone, Ada said. He said a few things that made me feel like he was measuring me. No wonder you looked odd after coming out of the classroom, Fred muttered, remembering the moment. Why didn't you tell Professor McGonagall? I told you. I have no evidence. Who would believe a first-year witch making an accusation with nothing to back it up? Ada sounded a little incredulous that the question needed asking. Dumbledore? The headmaster? He isn't you-know-who. He can't just do whatever he wants. She rolled her eyes at the twins' suggestion. Despite the fear you-know-who inspired, Ada thought of him as a man who lacked subtlety. If he'd conducted fewer attacks and more legitimate work, he might have succeeded, in her opinion. The twins, of course, thought Ada was stubborn and old-fashioned. Neither side was entirely wrong. They simply saw things from different stages of experience. So this is the secret you've been keeping from us all this time? Fred said. It does make sense to be relieved that Fooley is leaving, George added. Yes, it means I don't have to watch out for him every night. Ada nodded. There's no thief who can steal forever, and I can't be on guard forever. If I couldn't beat him, I would have had a talk with him long ago. The twins imagined what that talk might look like. Ada was capable of confronting someone, but whether it would be friendly was another matter. "Why didn't you tell us earlier?" they demanded. "Because dragging you into it could have put you in danger, and I wouldn't be that selfish," Ada said earnestly. She truly considered the twins her friends, even if they were still kids. Besides, there were other secrets she couldn't share. "Still, you could have given us the choice instead of deciding for us," George said. "Considering your children, we'll forgive your unilateral decision this time," Fred added. With Fooley leaving, there was less risk in telling them, so Ada confessed everything, but with a warning. "Only the three of us, no one else, and especially not Lee Jordan." The twins mimed sealing their lips. "Since this is something to celebrate." "Let's go celebrate," George finished. "Like by going into the Forbidden Forest again?" the twins suggested. "Please stop with the Gryffindor heroics. Wait until Fooley has actually left. Just a few more days," Ada said. "And how is your spider repellent practice going? I don't want to be chased by spiders the size of cars again." Last time she'd been chased by giant spiders like a stray dog, and she still held a grudge. She'd been studying spells to deal with them. Next time, those ugly things wouldn't get away so easily. The twins pictured Hagrid and his monstrous brood, Aragog's children, and grinned. "After dinner, shall we go see Hagrid?" George suggested. "Enjoy the good weather, get a walk in, and maybe pick up a bit of information about the Forbidden Forest for future adventures." "Why bother Hagrid? Isn't he busy with things in the forest lately?" Ada pushed herself up from the armchair. It was nearly time for the Great Hall. Fred smiled. "It won't be for rock cakes, anyway. There's nothing to do. Let's not waste a beautiful spring day." The terror of Hagrid's rock cakes still lingered in Ada's mind. Such a destructive food shouldn't exist. After lunch, Ada, with a much improved appetite, ate heartily. Bathed in the pale Scottish sun of April, she and the twins set off toward Hagrid's hut. Ada was in a bit of a grudge-holding phase with Hagrid, so she didn't plan to see him. She was only going because she missed Fang. 47. Prophecy confuses people. Ada and the twins didn't stay long at Hagrid's hut. After an hour, they were on their way. Hagrid's hands were never idle, even while he chatted, and they didn't want to keep him. As Hogwarts gamekeeper, Hagrid was responsible for keys and for dealing with things in the Forbidden Forest. Several creatures had been hurt there recently, and Hagrid had been busy treating them. From his words, Ada and the twins could hear his anger toward whoever had trespassed into the forest and harmed the poor little beasts. He thought the intruders were vicious. After leaving Hagrid, the three of them wandered down to the Black Lake and walked along its edge with no particular aim. The lake wasn't the blue of the sky, but there was a certain beauty where water met mountain. A giant squid surfaced, its tentacles slapping the water and spraying them with droplets. Ada watched it and wondered how big a griddle would need to be to roast something that size. Feeling unburdened, she was unusually lively that day. She and the twins even had a skipping stone contest, cheering when a stone bounded long and sinking into dejection when it didn't. That childish side of her rarely showed itself. They played by the lake until dusk and only returned to the castle as night began to fall. The walk back was full of chatter and laughter. The twins had an endless supply of jokes and stories. Being with them felt like living under a happiness charm. The threat from Fooley felt like it would soon be gone. All Ada had to do was wait and study for the final exams in a month. She was confident she would be first. Although Fooley's resignation had been accepted, he didn't leave immediately. Dumbledore wasn't the sort to turn an injured former professor out on the street. For the next week, Fooley recuperated in the hospital wing. No longer holding a post, he seemed to be getting his luck back, and his condition improved. The group of girls who'd been supporting him still visited often. Madame Pomfrey didn't forbid them, but limited visiting hours so she wouldn't have to patch him up for more distress. A few days later, Fooley was well enough to be discharged. He looked healthier and more energetic than he had in a long time. After quickly gathering his things from his office, he left Hogwarts at once. Overnight, it seemed. He didn't want to stay another second. He left faster than the finest broom, so fast that even the girls who had hoped to see him off couldn't stop him. They watched his retreating figure in silence and blessed him wordlessly. Ada was in that farewell crowd, though she stood back, deliberately small and inconspicuous. She wasn't there for sentiment. She wanted to make sure Fuli really left and to feel safe again. Even while he was hospitalized, she hadn't relaxed. As long as he hadn't gone, she worried he might suddenly spring up from his sickbed and make one last attempt on her. Now that he'd resigned and left completely, her tight chest finally loosened. What had been hidden in Hogwarts? Who had attacked Daniel? Why had a thief, who took nothing, entered the common rooms of all 4 houses? Who had snuck into the Forbidden Forest? With Fuli gone, those questions suddenly felt irrelevant to Ada. She no longer had to worry about them. Fuli's departure left the defenses against the dark arts post empty. For now, the classes were self-study, which suited most students fine. Under Fuli, the lessons had mostly been him reading straight from a book anyway. Snape, who had wanted the job badly, had not only failed to get it, but hadn't even been allowed to substitute teach. He took his disappointment out in potions, where his words grew sharper and his barbs more poisonous. Gryffindor paid the price, and Ada, as always, was one of his prime targets. Snape looked for excuses to dock points from their house, but the meaner abuses of earlier times didn't return. She hadn't been held after potions in a long time. Even when she and the twins snuck back into the Forbidden Forest during that period, she didn't get one of Snape's invitations. Ada and Snape had slid back into a tense coexistence. They disliked each other, but managed a functional peace. On this trip into the forest, the 3 were lucky. They didn't meet any creatures that looked like they wanted to make dinner out of them, nor did they run into anything especially dangerous. They did meet a centaur. Most centaurs were not fond of wizards, but Ada's luck held. Firenze, with a cream-colored hindquarters, was one of the rare centaurs who didn't shun humans. He was gentle and kindly persuaded them to leave. He even accompanied them partway, only turning back when they reached safety at the forest's edge. Firenze said many strange things as they went. He kept looking up at the stars and speaking in convoluted phrases. The twins were bewildered. His remarks left them feeling as though they weren't speaking the same language. Ada couldn't tease any clear information from him either. He refused to be direct and spoke almost in a kind of code. None of the 3 understood much about the constellations or the other things he mentioned. Divination hadn't started yet. Hogwarts offered it in 3rd year, and Ada never quite took to the style of diviners. If you could divine something, why wrap it in riddles? All that obfuscation made it impossible to tell what was actually being predicted. Ada suspected diviners liked to be mysterious, so their words sounded more profound. She believed in magic as matter-of-factly as anyone who'd found themselves in this world, but seeing an elderly soothsayer deliver an enigmatic pronouncement felt theatrical to her. Firenze wasn't charging a fee, and he wasn't trying to sell a reading, so why speak like a fortune-teller? From older students, she'd heard that divination would be taught by a peculiar witch named Sybil Trelawney, a tippler and a little unhinged, said to be the great-great-granddaughter of the seer Cassandra Trelawney. Most people thought Sybil didn't actually possess her ancestor's gift. Her eccentric habits fit the mold of the other eccentric professors at Hogwarts. The Transfiguration teacher was a stern older woman with a cat-like manner. The potions master was greasy and sharp-tongued. The history of magic teacher moped about like a spectral hypnotist. And the defense against the dark arts position seemed cursed to draw highly ambitious but unlucky candidates. A normal, reasonable person teaching at Hogwarts would stand out too much. So Ada wasn't surprised to hear Trelawney was odd. She didn't care much either way. Firenze eventually left them at the forest's edge, still speaking in half-poems and starry riddles. Ada and the twins walked back to the castle, puzzled and a little bemused by the encounter. They didn't notice an oddity on the Marauder's map. Someone who had already left the school had come back. The fire in the common room crackled. Even though it was nearly the end of April, nights at Hogwarts still held a chill. Earlier that evening, Firenze the Centaur had given a prophecy to 3 first years who barely understood what he was saying. The message had been almost useless. a hard-won divination handed over as if it cost nothing. Ferencz's star readings were always coherent. There was nothing wrong with his mind. If he'd chosen to reveal what he saw, he must have had a reason. It wasn't that Firenze had gone soft. Whatever had gone wrong was between Ada and the twins. If she couldn't make sense of it now, she decided not to dwell on it. She and the twins said goodnight and went to bed. Life went on. With April winding down, Dumbledore had left Hogwarts again, this time to attend Cornelius Fudge's inauguration in London. Fudge had been minister for some time and had busied himself with ministry matters, cultivating an image as a diligent public servant. He had delayed the ceremony because Dumbledore had been at the school and unavailable. Only after repeated invitations and a good deal of positive press showing the minister paying court to Dumbledore did Dumbledore finally travel to the ministry. The rumor that Fudge was Dumbledore's puppet had been around since he took office, and Fudge's public deference hardly helped quiet it. 2 days earlier, the twins had planned an elaborate prank on Filch and been caught red-handed by the irate caretaker. Their punishment was another stint cleaning the trophy room. Since the twins hadn't been present that evening, Ada sat with Angelina and Alicia at dinner, and they talked about girl things. Dumbledore's high seat at the staff table remained empty. Snape's chair was also vacant until he slipped into the great hall near the end of dinner. After the meal, Ada left alone, not back to the common room with Angelina and the others, but to the kitchens to fetch some food so the twins wouldn't come back hungry. Near the great hall, a senior Slytherin intercepted her. "This is from Professor Snape," the girl said, dropping a folded note into Ada's hand. "Remember to be there on time." Ada unfolded it. The neat, dark handwriting was unmistakably Snape's. "Tonight at 8. Dungeon classroom." Snape hadn't sought her out in a long time. She had no idea why he wanted her, but she knew better than to ignore him. She handed the note back. "Actually, I can't make it. If you like, you can go in my place." The Slytherin's face hardened. "Don't be ungrateful. Mudblood." The insult was spat low, too close for comfort. She leaned forward and hissed, "You'd better be early. Don't keep someone waiting. I'm not a fool like Avery who dishonors purebloods. If you don't do as I say, I have ways to make you suffer." Then she turned and left, glancing back with clear disgust. Ada watched her go without flinching. Empty threats meant little. If the girl tried anything, Ada suspected the outcome would be very different from what the Slytherin expected. She planned to be there, and to be on time. Back in the dormitory, Ada did homework while chatting with Angelina and the others, and she wanted to wait for the twins to tell them about the Slytherin. But the twins didn't return. Filch had taken them at the end of afternoon classes, and they should have been back by now. They were old hands at Filch's punishments, practically experts on every cupboard and brass knob in the trophy room. Ada watched the common room clock. It was nearly 8. She couldn't stand being late. She left a note with Angelina, handed the twins food to her, and hurried out. It struck her as odd that Snape had set the meeting for 8. He usually summoned her at 7, or at the very latest by past. Hogwarts kept a curfew to discourage students from wandering after dark, and younger students were expected back even earlier. 8 left her little time for whatever the head of Slytherin wanted, and it made no sense unless there was some purpose in making the appointment late. The corridors were sparsely populated. Most younger students had returned to their common rooms. Only a few older students lingered. Ada knew the way to the dungeon classroom by heart, and the faint candlelight threw flickering shadows across her face as she walked. When she arrived, the door was tightly shut. That was strange. Snape usually left it open, often so a student could knock and come in without him having to get up. Today, the door was locked. Ada rapped sharply. There was no answer. The corridor swallowed the sound. She checked the scrap of paper again. The time, the place, and the handwriting all matched. This wasn't a prank. Snape could be abrasive, but he wasn't the sort to mess about like that. She considered leaving. Between a missing professor and a locked classroom, something was wrong. Then the door produced a soft click from the dark within. Ada's hand went to her wand. A narrow gap opened, and a figure stepped out, lit from behind. The person smiled, a slow, mocking curl of the lips. "How could it be you?" the voice taunted. 49. Soul-stealing. Ada stared in surprise at the figure who had appeared before her. It was the Slytherin senior who had delivered her letter that evening. Acting at once had been reckless, but given how uneasy she felt around the underground classroom, Ada would probably do the same again, strike first and seize the advantage. Why had she been brought here? Why had she come? She gripped her wand and watched the other girl closely, ready to react. Ada didn't know the senior well. They had only spoken today, and before that, Ada had seen her once among Fooley's fan club. On the day Fooley left school, this Slytherin had been the one crying the loudest. People had called her Eruini. Ada couldn't think how she might have offended her. Perhaps their only real connection had been that shared goodbye. Eruini said nothing as she stepped nearer. A mocking smile curled her lips. She raised her wand, and a blue spell shot toward Ada. Ada dodged. The spell struck the wall and blasted a large hole. Flying stone chips left Ada looking disheveled, but she had no time to tidy herself. She pointed her wand toward the doorway as Eruini walked out of the classroom. Stupefy! The spell flashed down the short corridor and struck Eruini before she could fully react. The Slytherin flicked her wand and deflected it, then immediately fired off 4 silent spells in rapid succession. Ada danced back, deflecting and dodging. When she couldn't escape, she held up a shield charm to block. As her wards took the blows, Eruini's face changed. Curiosity mixed with a cold, bitter resentment. Could a junior at Hogwarts really cast a string of silent spells like that? Ada wondered. Expelliarmus, Ada bellowed, and a brilliant red beam shot straight toward Eruini. Expelliarmus seemed ordinary, but in Ada's experience, it was devastatingly effective. Rob your opponent of their wand, and they were at a terrible disadvantage. Few could cast wandlessly, and those who could rarely fell prey to an Expelliarmus. Ada had practiced that spell hard since the system had rated it so highly. She hoped to knock the wand from Eruini's hand. Eruini barely bothered. With a casual flick, she deflected the Expelliarmus, making Ada realize the spell's reputation sometimes exceeded its execution. The two of them had already exchanged enough magic to leave a mess, yet no one came from the corridor. The duel felt like its own arena. Only one of them would leave standing. Eruini fired another silent spell. A faint red light raced at Ada. Protego! Ada raised her wand and the shield took the hit, but the impact felt like it wanted to wrench the wand from her fingers. She tightened her grip. Imperio. Eruini spoke, the only spoken curse of the exchange, the unforgivable curse. Where Eruini had stood in front of Ada a heartbeat ago, she now stood behind her. The earlier Expelliarmus had been a feint. The real intent had been the Imperio fired from behind. Apparition was forbidden within Hogwarts, and Ada had never expected Eruini to be suddenly behind her. The curse hit full on. If it had been the killing curse, Ada thought dizzily, she would already be dead. At first, the Imperio's effect blanked Ada's mind. Yet it wasn't fear that came. What washed over her was an unnatural, overwhelming joy. Nothing else seemed to matter. The system chimed faintly in her head, ding, 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 while that happiness swelled. Slowly, though, Ada realized something was wrong. She summoned every scrap of will and training she had to fight the feeling, to push back the foreign voice trying to claim her. Resisting the Imperio shared some techniques with occlumency. Ada knew a little occlumency, the defensive art the system had taught her first, enough to keep others from probing her memories. But her practice had always been passive. She wasn't skilled at actively shielding herself from a curse that sought to dominate, and her resistance faltered. Eruini kept the wand pointed and deepened the spell, pressuring Ada's mind until at last the Slytherin's will overrode hers. Satisfied, Eruini lowered her wand and cast a charm to repair the damage they'd made. The corridor knit itself back together as if nothing had happened. In Ada's head, clear as spoken aloud, came a command, "Follow me." She tried to fight, but her body moved as if it belonged to someone else. Wooden and dreamlike, she obeyed. Eruini led her out of the corridor. Other students saw them pass, but thought nothing of the pair. A Gryffindor and a Slytherin walking together was odd, but not alarming. Under the cover of night, they left the castle and vanished into the darkness. Around 8 o'clock, the Weasley twins returned from their punishment and strolled arm in arm into the Gryffindor common room. Not seeing Ada, they went straight to Angelina. "Hi, Angelina," Fred called. "Where's Ada?" Angelina, chin propped on her hand, replied softly, "Professor Snape called her away. This is the food and the note she left for you." The twins grabbed the food tray and happily set to the sandwiches the house elves had made. George asked, "When did she leave?" "Less than half an hour ago. Professor Snape told her to go to the underground classroom at 8, Alicia said, pointing to the note Ada had left. The twins hunched over the paper. It read, "Professor Snape wants me to go to the underground classroom at 8, Ada." At first they ate slowly, but seeing the note set their appetites racing. They finished the sandwiches in a few bites, a whirlwind of chewing that left Angelina and Alicia staring. The twins darted up to their dormitory. There was an ink blot on the note. If it had been anyone else's handwriting, they might not have noticed, but they knew Ada's habits. She never left careless smudges. The blot felt deliberate, like a signal. Back in their dormitory, they unfurled the Marauders map. They needed to know where Ada had gone. "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good." The ink-scrawled names marched across the parchment. The twins first checked the underground classroom. Every time Snape summoned Ada, she'd been there. But tonight, the map showed no Ada, and Professor Snape wasn't there either. They only saw Mrs. Norris prowling the corridors. Fred kept his eyes inside the castle while George widened his search. "I found her!" George cried at last. Ada's tiny dot was moving away from the castle toward the Forbidden Forest. Fred looked, and a sinking feeling settled in both of them. Why would Ada be with him? Why would they go to the Forbidden Forest? They muttered in unison, a bad premonition tightening their chests. Thanks to Sifsy for the reward. Eruini, a Slytherin senior, led the way, Ada dazedly following as they crossed the wide lawn toward the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid's cabin still had lights on. Ada wanted desperately to run, to tear free, but she had no way to resist the Imperio. She couldn't speak or move of her own will, only obey Eruini's commands. As Hagrid's lights winked out behind them, they walked straight into the dark. They did not linger at the border. They went deep in, where no animals drew near, and not even an insect stirred. Eruini stopped. Her small frame suddenly lengthened and filled out, her robes no longer fitting. Her pale, long hair darkened and shortened. In moments, the Slytherin senior was gone, replaced by a burly man in a Hogwarts uniform. Only Ada watched the transformation, and she couldn't even cheer. The man turned. It was Benedict Fooley, the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor who had supposedly left the school. He retreated behind a tree, changing his clothes and muttering, "Polyjuice potion's duration is still hard to control. Potions, this subject, annoying as Snape." He re-emerged, holding Ada's wand in his right hand and tapping it against his palm. He walked to her and said, "Today I'll send you on your way. It's the greatest honor of your life." He tapped the wand gently against her cheek. "I meant to throw you to a nest of spiders. They'd eat you down to the bone. But I'm not utterly cruel, so I'll do it after I finish killing you." A smile split his face. He raised his wand and began the incantation. Avada! Ada, who had been standing like a statue, suddenly lashed out, kicking him in the stomach. The blow doubled Fooley over, interrupting him. He bent like a shrimp. Having broken free from the Imperio, Ada rammed her head into him, knocking his wand from his hand. She didn't try to fight him like she had with Avery. She wasn't a brawler and wouldn't win an arm wrestle with an adult. But she wasn't reckless. Swiftly, she seized the fallen wand, shouted, "Stupefy," and sprinted away, not caring whether the spell struck him. Fooley, startled and momentarily on the ground, recovered fast. His reflexes were seasoned by combat. He rose, drew his own wand, and prepared to counterattack. Rage flared in him. "Crucio," he barked. Killing her wouldn't ease his fury. The curse missed. Ada twisted into a serpentine run, never in a straight line, always slipping left and right to avoid Fooley's aim. Spell after spell slammed into the trees around her. Fooley closed the distance steadily. "Run! Keep running!" he roared from behind her. "I'll torture you properly and then throw you into a spider nest. I'll watch them make a meal of you." "Stupefy! Confringo!" Ada called as she ran, wheeling to fire back. Her attacks were wild, improvised, enough to keep him busy, but not to defeat him. Fooley parried each charm easily with a flick of his wand and shouted, "Running's useless, Trist. You can't escape." Instead of pulling away, the distance between them shrank. "Don't act like you were so capable in the castle," he taunted. "If it'd been that useless girl, Erwini, you'd have failed already." Being knocked down had stung Fooley's pride, but he forced himself calm as they raced. He intended to let her live a little longer. Prey, he thought, always struggled. The net closes. Ada ran until she could no longer pretend she was just escaping. She skidded behind a thick tree and panted, trying to steady herself for a last stand. She hadn't stopped because she couldn't run. She had stopped because she realized something worse. No matter how she ran, she always circled back near Fooley. The forest around them had begun to feel maddeningly familiar. She hadn't left this small area. She was trapped. At first she'd blamed herself for zigzagging, but after several furious laps, she understood the truth. She kept ending up near him, no matter what. Fooley pursued with the leisure of a cat playing with a mouse. "Why aren't you running? Maybe if you ran a bit faster, you would have escaped," he said, as if offering friendly advice. Ada didn't believe him for a second. After the chaos she'd caused in the castle and this strange enclosing wall of forest, if escape were possible, he might as well slit his own throat. "So you finally realized," Fooley said, amused. "You're not completely stupid." He slowed to a stroll and stopped not far from her hiding spot. He aimed a harmless charm at the side of the tree as if playing. "I've some talent with banishing charms, and some talent with trapping. So you can't leave, and no one's going to break in to disturb me. You're finished." Ada, no longer silent, mocked him. "Professor Fooley is quite skilled setting such a grand trap just for a first year." "A first year? You're modest." He advanced, step by step. "Can a first year master occlumency? Can they make my legilimency useless? Can they learn to shrug off my imperio? Can a first year wield spells like you did?" "Maybe I'm exceptionally gifted," Ada said, bitterly amused. "Your talent is considerable, but you aren't worthy of it." Fooley's voice rose. "Avada Kedavra!" He hurled the killing curse at the tree behind which Ada hid. The spell struck the trunk. The tree's life drained away. Leaves withered and spiraled down. "Expelliarmus!" Ada fled for another tree, sending the disarming charm as she ran. "I can't get away anyway," she called back. "Since we're teacher and student professor, let me die with some dignity." Fooley laughed loudly. "Do you expect to blind my sight by moving in circles? Once or twice that might work, but you're stupid enough to retrace places I've already been. You were the one who trespassed in the Forbidden Forest, weren't you?" Ada tried a different tack. "You were the one who stole from the 4 houses, weren't you?" "Yes," he said, flippant. "It was nothing difficult." "And Daniel Bell?" Ada pressed. "Who?" Fooley blinked, then remembered. "Oh, him. Yes, it was me." Ada's voice hardened. "Why?" Fooley shrugged, casually cruel. "Because I wanted his help. He dared resist my control, so I taught him a lesson." He said it like a man recounting chores. "I rewarded his bravery with a crucio. I didn't expect him to be so fragile." His tone made Ada's blood boil. She'd been under the Imperio herself. The helplessness it enforced was monstrous. Those who used it deserved no mercy. "So you reduced him to that state?" "I rewarded him," Fooley repeated, smirking. "And soon I will reward you with a crucio as well. Hold on a little longer. Don't be like that whimpering child who screams for his mother." Every time he answered, a spell flashed from his wand toward Ada's concealment, an ugly reminder that he toyed with her. She ducked and wove, each answer a threat. "One last question," she said. "You left school. Why come back? And why pick me?" 51. Battle in the Forbidden Forest. In the Forbidden Forest, Fooley, known around Hogwarts as the Tree Destroyer, had just used the killing curse again. Another tree exploded into splinters. He called out, "Don't you know why I came back? Weren't you prancing around the castle trying to find something against me?" He stepped closer to Ada as he spoke. She pressed herself against a thick trunk, wand gripped in both hands, listening to his footsteps and measuring the distance between them. The months of practice hadn't been wasted. Ada wasn't Fooley's match yet, but she could withstand more than a single spell. She could last a few rounds. "You were looking for something, and you didn't find it," she said, and when his footsteps came even closer, she pivoted and fired a stupefy. Fooley was ready. He blocked it with a swift wand movement. "Last October," Ada continued, panting slightly, "you and Snape were talking in the corridor. I happened to be passing by." Fooley frowned, then remembered. Snape's odd behavior flashed across his face. "Ungrateful Snape, he found you and protected you. Dumbledore's dog." Fooly spat. He betrayed his master. I gave him a chance to atone, and he betrayed him again. Coward. Professor, swaying the wind can be a useful skill, Ada said. I still haven't figured out what could make you so obsessed. How could someone so shallow as you understand the greatness of the master? Fooly snarled. It's an item the master made himself. It will bring the master back. When he returns, he'll lead us to correct this wrong world. Those unworthy of magic will be purged, and the wizarding world will be pure again. But you ran away in the face of the curse, Ada said, glancing at the ruined trunks around them. Will your master forgive your cowardice? Don't you dare speak his name with your lowly mouth, you filthy mudblood. Fooly's voice went unhinged. He waved his wand. Branches and stones ripped from the ground and hurled toward Ada, who was sheltering behind trees. She threw up a protego, deflecting each projectile until dull thuds echoed from the shield. Ada had always had a sharp tongue. She knew she couldn't beat him outright, but she wouldn't be cowed. What's so terrible about Voldemort's name? She taunted. A dark wizard leader who was defeated by a baby. Shut up! Shut up! Fooly roared and lashed out. His spells ignored the trees and whipped toward Ada like living whips. She kept throwing up protective charms, protego, then protego totalum, until the magic had carved marks in the bark and left her skin feeling as if it had been scraped by knives. She sidestepped and countered, sending pebbles and debris at him and following with another stupefy. With every exchange, she felt her reflexes, her timing, and her control sharpening. You will pay for your insolence. You will pay for your curiosity. Fooly bellowed. He slammed a shield to ward off Ada's attack. She taunted again, sharper this time. Does your master know his loyal servant is about to kill a 13-year-old girl? Oh, never mind. He couldn't even defeat a 1-year-old baby. Part of her barrage was deliberate provocation, but there was a plan behind the noise. She'd left a blot of ink on a note for the Weasley twins earlier, an unusual mark on the Marauders map to draw their attention to her name. If the twins noticed, they'd bring Professor McGonagall. McGonagall was Ada's last hope. She had to stall long enough for help to arrive. Come out! The cat and mouse game has gone on long enough, Fooly called. Don't delay any longer. The spiders must be getting hungry. The trees around them had mostly been destroyed. There was nowhere left to hide. Fooly flicked his wand toward a broken log and sent it spinning through the air like a battering ram. Ada readied herself. Crushing spell, she cried, and the log shattered, but splinters continued on their trajectory. She ducked as they hissed overhead. If she hadn't, she might have lost her head. For a brief, ridiculous second, she was grateful for being a little short. You would, phoenix feather, 13 3/4 inches. Her wand was modest and true. She kissed it, pushed herself up, and stepped back into the open. I'm a Gryffindor, she muttered, and then, reckless, she launched a full attack. Crucio! Expelliarmus! Fooly bellowed in reply. The two spells didn't produce the dramatic wandlock duel of Hogwarts legend. Their magics crossed and scattered. Ada's improvisation continued. She gathered the scattered splinters and shaped them into a scrappy conjured puppy that bounded toward Fooly, yapping. Perhaps it was a distraction. Perhaps it was meant to discomfit him. Fooly reacted violently. His wand cracked through the air, and the puppy exploded back into splinters. He didn't stop there. 3 fire serpents burst from his wand tip, followed by a gale that screamed toward Ada, an angry wind that carried something like steel-edged whispers in it. Abrupt spells, Ada called under her breath as she threw up shields. Finite incantatum, salvio hexia, protego. The hexes tore at the wind and the snakes. She dispelled the serpents and blunted the gale, but Fooly kept coming. She fired Petrificus Totalis and Incarcerus to stall him. Ropes shot from her wand and coiled like pythons around Fooly. He wrestled free, and the wind died away. He waved his wand several times until the ropes dissolved. For a moment, Fooly looked unsettled. Ada could tell he was noticing something about her. Since she'd arrived at the castle months ago, she had changed, from someone who could only recite charms to someone who used spell characteristics and timing to improve her odds. She'd learned to turn a battlefield's scraps into weapons and delays into defenses. Professor, Ada said between breaths, you still haven't explained why you picked on me. Fooly glared. You should answer your students' questions and clear their doubts. That's your duty, she added. voice cool and insolent, part reproach, part defiance, keeping him talking, buying more time for the hope that help would come. Esmeralda peppered Fooly with questions to distract him while she unhesitatingly hurled spell after spell. Stupefy, a crushing spell, a string of binding charms. She varied her angles and timing so the attacks came from all directions. Some Fooly could block, others were so awkwardly aimed he could only dodge them with his body, rolling on the forest floor to avoid the last one. Esmeralda had always dreamed of a magical machine gun. A single killing blow would be ideal, but if that wasn't possible, then overwhelming firepower would do. Throw enough spells and one would land. The point was suppression. Now Fooly looked disheveled, robes strewn with leaves, face scratched. Nothing like the elegant professor he'd once been. Then again, the old noble Fooly had been gone for a long time. Ever since the curse's power had surfaced, he'd been gaunt and ill, not the man he'd been at the start of the school year. He brushed leaves from his robes, raised his wand, and a column of fire sprang to life. The flames wrapped around Esmeralda and bit at her relentlessly. She had to keep waving her wand, pouring magic into holding them at bay so they wouldn't consume her. "I only meant to give Dumbledore and his lackey Snape a little trouble," Fooly said, the words carried as he held the flames. "But they dared to interfere. How could I let them leave smiling?" He looked at Esmeralda with a slow, satisfied smile. "They've watched me, and even after I leave, they'll still distrust me. I decided to teach them a lesson." Esmeralda's mind ran through protests. Is this really necessary? Isn't this reckless? Are you just picking on me because I'm easy? But she kept them to herself. She lashed out with another charm. "So you picked me because I stumbled on your secret? Because I was nosing around? Even if you kill me, you gain nothing. What you seek will remain unfound." The flames obeyed Fooly's will but didn't spread. Their purpose had been to wear her down, and they had done their job. He extinguished them and moved in, though not directly in front of her. The memory of their recent close fight made him wary. "So what if they suspect me?" he went on. "No one cares about the life or death of a lowly mudblood. No one will look too hard. This is your fate. Don't blame anyone else. It's over, Trist. Time for you to say goodnight to this tired world." He spoke the last with the flat certainty of a man about to strike a final blow. "Avada Kedavra! Expelliarmus!" Esmeralda shouted at the same second, and their spells met. A beam of light snapped between them, crackling where it touched, shattering nearby branches and stones. For a breathless moment, the world narrowed to that crackling connection as both poured everything into it. Esmeralda braced on both feet, two hands gripping her wand, feeding every last reserve into the clash. Fooly matched her, and for a long, dangerous moment neither yielded. They were locked in a stalemate. That stalemate unnerved Fooly. She was not the easy victim he'd expected. The longer it went on, the more convinced he became that she could not be allowed to live. Suddenly, he withdrew the green of his killing curse. The Avada Kedavra vanished, and in its place, Fooly cast Crucio while moving to dodge the Expelliarmus he had just let loose. His timing was brutal and precise. The Crucio struck with no warning. Esmeralda had no time to finish the disarming. The shock hit her all at once. Pain like 1,000 knives shredded her skin, like countless insects gnawed at her bones. She bit hard on her lip to keep from screaming. Blood welled at the corner of her mouth. The unforgivable curse did what it was meant to. It tore at body and mind. The worst, thankfully, did not last long. The pain receded, but the memory of it was seared into her. She slowly pushed herself up against a fallen trunk, breath ragged, her wand hand trembling. Fooly, meanwhile, had not entirely escaped the earlier Expelliarmus. The red bolt had clipped his left arm, slamming him back. He hit the ground hard, muttering mudblood between clenched teeth. That slur had become a kind of mantra for him, justifying his cruelty. He crawled forward, vindication written on his face, as if the fight had proven his first impulse right. Esmeralda fumbled to raise her hand, but the after-effects of Crucio left it clumsy and weak. Fooly flicked his wand. Her wand slipped from her grasp and skittered away. Her life flashed before her in fragments, this life and the one before, and she felt again that bitter tug of regret and reluctance. She had died once. Death no longer terrified her in the same way. What made life precious now were the fragile strands she couldn't bear to lose. a healthy body, a few true friends. That reluctance was the thing that made her fight. Fully stood over her, a few paces away, face hard. "You lowly mudblood," he spat, "always clinging to meaningless resistance. You'll die by my hand anyway. Why not accept it?" "You talk too much," Esmeralda said through gritted teeth, forcing the smile like a knife. Every word cost her. Villains always die for talking too much. Fully twisted his features into a sneer. "No one will come to interfere. I'm sure of it. Dumbledore is not at Hogwarts. The wards I set, no one can break them." He drew in a breath. "Esmeralda Twister, die." "Avada," he began. The green light never formed. His killing curse was interrupted mid-gesture. Fully wheeled, panic ripping through him. Who's there?" he demanded, looking frantically around the trees. Someone had come into the forest, but he hadn't sensed them. Esmeralda, suddenly giddy with exhausted relief, laughed aloud, more like a villain's jeer than anything else. "Shut up!" Fully snarled and tried to hit her with Crucio again, but she blocked it this time. "See? I told you villains die from talking too much. Still not convinced? Guess who stopped you? One galleon says it's Professor McGonagall." A stern female voice echoed through the trees. "Gambling isn't a good habit, Esmeralda." As the last words died away, 3 figures came out of the trees, moving from the dark forest toward the clearing. Dumbledore led them. He had only just returned to Hogwarts from London and hadn't even had time to go to his office. His face showed nothing as he walked forward, wand in hand. Professor McGonagall and Professor Snape flanked him, McGonagall on his left, Snape on his right. It had been McGonagall who had just spoken. Her lips were a thin, hard line, anger written across her face. She held her wand so tightly, the veins on the back of her hand stood out. If Harry hadn't still been clinging to Fully's side, she wouldn't have minded showing that man a thing or two. Bully her student? Did he really think a lion would not strike back? Snape followed more slowly, his face deathly pale. He hadn't drawn his wand, but the look he gave Fully was full of cold disgust, as if regarding an irritating insect. "Dumbledore, you actually came back from London," Fully sneered. "How convenient." "I was told someone had broken into the school," Dumbledore said simply. "I've always thought I was rather popular with the students." "I'm not one of those brats who play childish games with you," Fully spat. "Those brats are as annoying as you are." "Benedict, you shouldn't be here, and you certainly shouldn't be threatening my student," Dumbledore said, nodding toward Harry. At that moment, Harry flew toward them from where he'd been sitting on the ground. McGonagall was quick to catch him. She supported him with one arm while her free hand checked him over for injuries. Apart from the effects of the Cruciatus curse, his wounds were not serious. A little singed hair from the flames, scrapes, and a few scratches on his face. Seeing he wasn't grievously hurt, McGonagall's anger shifted. She gave his backside 2 sharp, almost maternally furious pats. She already understood why he'd gone into the forest and was furious at his recklessness. The twins had found out where Harry was and had raced from the common room to fetch McGonagall, sketching the situation badly but urgently. She had taken them straight to the headmaster's office on the 8th floor. Dumbledore and Snape had followed them to the forest. That was how they'd arrived in time to stop the killing curse. Harry, who'd just been smacked, made no sound. He was exhausted. When he'd been alone with Fully, he had been fearless, fighting as best he could. Now, supported by McGonagall, someone who had always treated him kindly, he could finally let his guard down. As for the spanking, he hardly minded. McGonagall's scolding, even when sharp, was full of concern. It warmed more than it chastised. Holding him there, McGonagall's anger softened. She hugged him as if to keep him safe from any more harm. Snape looked at Harry too. The boy's weakened state was a sharp contrast to his usual defiance, and even Snape's hard heart felt a pang. More than pity, though, he felt a more complex anger. At Harry, at the Gryffindor stubbornness that had led the boy into the trap. He had once thought Harry different from the other Gryffindors. Tonight's recklessness convinced him otherwise. Dumbledore stepped forward, putting himself between McGonagall and Harry and the man before them. "I have given you chances, Benedict," he said quietly. "A chance?" Fully barked a laugh. "You've always been watching me, sending your lackeys to spy. Is that your idea of mercy?" Snape, having been called a lackey, didn't bother to look at him. From his robes, he produced a small glass vial and handed it to Harry. The potion inside was an awful color, revolting to look at. Harry, still curled into McGonagall's arms, tried to shrink away and refused it. Snape, never one to be gentle, seized Harry's chin, forced his mouth open, and tipped the vial straight in. The potion went down with a glug, glug, glug. Afterward, Snape wiped his hands on Harry's robes with a look of disgust. Almost immediately, the potion took effect. Warmth spread through Harry's body, and the worst of the pain eased. Snape's potions were invariably effective, if only their appearance and taste could be improved. Harry threw Snape a look of mingled contempt and disgust, his hair mussed and his face still dirty. Snape ignored it. He had done what was necessary. The rest was Dumbledore's to handle. Harry dug a warped piece of chocolate from his pocket. He always kept some on him for energy and comfort. It had been crushed and partially melted in the fight, but it would do. He offered it to McGonagall. She misread his gesture, thinking he couldn't manage to unwrap it. With characteristic brusque affection, she unwrapped it one-handed and fed it to him. "Once you were so obedient and sensible," Dumbledore said, remembering, "I have been waiting all term for you to come to me. Instead, you've kept making foolish choices." Fooley's expression slid into something feral. He rolled up his sleeve to show a dark mark on his forearm, unfinished, pale and hard to make out in the dim light. "The Dark Lord taught me what life is," he cried. "I will follow him to the top of the world." He turned to Snape. "When the Dark Lord returns, he will punish the traitors." "The Dark Lord may return," Snape said at last, his voice cold, "but you will not live to see that day. Do you think I am like you or Malfoy, groveling to the Ministry and to Dumbledore to save our skins? You live only to wait for the Dark Lord's return, and then hope he will set things right for you." Snape's contempt for Fooley was clear. He didn't want to be dragged down to argue with someone who made him feel he had to lower himself to their level. He would rather end him quickly. "Unlike you," Fooley went on, mistaking Snape's silence for fear, "I am loyal to the Dark Lord. It is my glory, the glory of my family." He seemed oblivious to the lack of reaction from his audience. Dumbledore sighed. "That young man can never return," he murmured. Whether he meant Fooley's salvation or something more ominous, it was hard to tell. Fooley raised his wand high. "Come then, a faithful servant of the Dark Lord will face you, Dumbledore," he shouted. "Let me." "Me," McGonagall snapped, fury in her tone. "He hurt my student." "Let the old man stretch his bones," Dumbledore replied at once, and then, softer to McGonagall, "You have more important things to do. I think our boy needs rest." The potion made Harry drowsy. His eyelids grew heavy, and his limbs felt leaden. McGonagall nodded. It would be better to take him back herself and fetch the Weasley twins out of the forest. With a flick of her wand, she transfigured a stretcher and set it to float. With Snape's help, she laid Harry on it and secured him. McGonagall tapped the stretcher. It rose and followed her, as if carried by unseen hands. Snape cast one last pitiful look at Fooley and left with them. "It's just the two of us, then," Dumbledore said, turning back to face the man who still stood in the clearing. Fooley's spell answer came without another word, a blinding green flash as he cried the words everyone dreaded. Dumbledore only sighed softly. What an evil spell. Inside the Forbidden Forest, Fooley sent a killing curse at Dumbledore, a streak of green that sped toward the old headmaster. Dumbledore remained calm. With a flick of his wand, a broken tree branch slammed into the curse and diverted it. Fooley attacked frantically, his wand never still, but his spells did little to disturb Dumbledore. The old man blocked each barrage with effortless, elegant movements. If Fooley had been toying with Ada before, the roles were now reversed. He was the one being toyed with, not because Dumbledore enjoyed it, but because the gap between them was simply too vast. Fooley still fought on the ground, while Dumbledore seemed to operate on an entirely different level. All of Fooley's attacks felt impotent. Pride hurt. Fooley had always been hailed a genius. Voldemort had once favored him and let him into the Death Eater's circle. But by the time he might have fully joined, Voldemort had fallen, and Fooley blamed himself for arriving too late. He had imagined that, had he been taken as a confidant sooner, everything would have been different. Now, breathless, humiliation and powerlessness washed over him. He knew he was outmatched, but never had he realized the difference could be so absolute. Facing Dumbledore, he felt as insignificant as a boy. Dumbledore countered. The old man could not afford to tarry in the cold forest. He turned his wand and unleashed a brilliant white light that engulfed Fuli. No matter how fiercely Fuli waved his wand, the light held him. Within it, whip-like tendrils lashed at his body, and he howled in rage. When the light faded, Fuli knelt on the forest floor, bound by vines that had sprung from nowhere. The more he struggled, the tighter they wound. Panting with exhaustion, he snarled, "Are you going to kill me, Dumbledore?" Dumbledore looked at him with something like regret. Measured by magic alone, Fuli had once been a fine wizard. His combat potential would have served well in wartime, but he had chosen a road of no return. If he had chosen differently, Dumbledore thought, he might have achieved greater things than sinking into the dark arts and relying only on the killing curse. "No," Dumbledore said, "I will not kill you. You will, however, pay for what you have done. Daniel, Bell, and Ada, you are responsible for these 2 attacks." "Responsible? Send me to Azkaban?" Fuli laughed, sneering. "They'll hail me as a hero when I get there." "Perhaps," Dumbledore replied, "but the Dementors will welcome you most of all. I do not like those creatures, but they are the guards of Azkaban." "I will watch you from Azkaban," Fuli spat. "The day the Master kills you, I will celebrate," he went on, venomous. "Even if I die, others will continue to resist, and someone will defeat him." Dumbledore paused, then said softly, "This world never lacks heroes. They always appear when they are needed." He raised his wand, and without another word, sent a stupefy at the bound man. Fuli fell unconscious. Ada lay on the stretcher, staring up at the fading white light. She had wanted to watch, to see Dumbledore teach Fuli a lesson, to witness how the greatest wizard fought, but she could not. The life and death strain, the repeated spells, and the fear had drained her. She was listless, even her hair seeming duller than usual. Professor McGonagall, always sharp-eyed but now pressed for time, misread Ada's condition as pain and hurried the group onward rather than letting the girl linger. The stretcher party, McGonagall, Snape, Hagrid, and the twins among them, left the Forbidden Forest at a brisk pace. At the forest's edge, they met a fully armed Hagrid and the Weasley twins, pacing anxiously. The boys rushed forward when they saw Ada. The past hours of helplessness had tormented them. If Filch hadn't detained them earlier, they thought, maybe Ada would have had someone to turn to and might never have run to that underground classroom alone. Guilt and worry had gnawed at them both. "Ada, are you all right?" they demanded. Relief washed over them when she answered, faintly smiling. "Lower your voices, Mr. Weasley," Professor McGonagall snapped, displeased. "She needs to rest." The twins nodded, but stayed by the stretcher, clutching Ada's hands as if afraid to let go. "I'm fine," Ada murmured. "I made you worry." Her smile was brave but fragile. It cost her dearly. Fred vowed, "Next time we'll stand in front of you." "No, there won't be a next time. You won't be in danger again." George added, "You won't be alone anymore. We'll protect you." "Unless we die, we won't let anyone bully you," they said together. "We'll all live very well," Ada answered, grinning faintly despite her exhaustion. Severus Snape watched the scene and, as if to puncture the moment, cut in. "Weasley, you'd best not talk to her anymore. I don't mind pouring another bottle of silencing potion down Trist's throat." Conversation died. The twins fell silent, afraid to disturb Ada, who had little strength left. "Hagrid," McGonagall said when he approached, lowering her voice though still loud, "Ada needs to rest. Wait here for Dumbledore. He'll be out soon." "All right, Professor," Hagrid answered. He patted Ada's hair gently, then retreated to the forest edge with the others. The party hurried back to the castle and carried Ada to the hospital wing, where Madame Pomfrey took immediate charge. The moment she touched the bed, Ada slid into a deep, healing sleep. The twins wanted to stay, but McGonagall firmly ordered them back to the common room and escorted them away. Not long after the group had left the forest, a figure emerged from the trees. "Who's there?" Hagrid called, raising his crossbow. "It's me, Hagrid," came Dumbledore's voice. "Professor Dumbledore." Hagrid lowered his weapon. Behind Dumbledore, Fuli floated unconscious, bound. Hagrid hoisted him onto his shoulder. "What do we do now?" he asked. "Professor McGonagall should have written to the minister," Dumbledore said. "We'll hand him over to Fudge when he arrives." "Is he going to Azkaban?" Hagrid asked, the name of the prison making even the big man quake. Perhaps, Dumbledore replied. It depends on how Fudge wants to handle it. The Ministry hasn't caught a Death Eater in a long time. 55. Wake while Ada slept soundly in the school hospital, Benedict Fooley had already received his punishment. After Professor McGonagall escorted the twins back to their common room, she sent a letter to Minister Fudge. The minister, who had been in London, did not delay. He arrived at Hogwarts with several aurors soon after. Fudge and McGonagall went straight to Dumbledore's office. The minister spoke with Dumbledore for less than half an hour. He accepted Dumbledore's account without hesitation and even asked Dumbledore how to proceed, as if Dumbledore were the minister and he the undersecretary. Dumbledore, however, offered no advice. He left the decision to Fudge. He had the power to seize authority if he wanted it, but he did not. Power fascinated people too easily, and Dumbledore had learned the cost of that fascination long ago. Fooley was kept in his office, his wand taken, his body still bound by the thorny, magical vines that had held him. Hagrid, crossbow in hand, watched over the unconscious man at Dumbledore's request. The aurors from the Ministry removed Fooley from Hagrid and, without trial, took him directly to Azkaban. Dementors, cold and despairing, awaited him there, and the long sentence would sap whatever life a prisoner had left. Many who went to Azkaban lost their minds. Death there was not an uncommon outcome. Perhaps Fooley would come to while they flew over the North Sea. Perhaps only after the cell door slammed behind him. In any case, the red carpet welcome he had hoped for would not come. A known follower of Lord Voldemort who attacked 2 Hogwarts students. Those charges alone would keep him chained in Azkaban until he was old. If there were other crimes to his name, a pit might become his grave. During Ada's sleep, the twins stayed by her bedside whenever they could, only leaving for classes and to sleep. Professor McGonagall had ordered them to attend lessons, and the twins dared not openly defy her. When curfew came, Madame Pomfrey chased them out without ceremony. They had given up Quidditch practice and even their favorite pranks to be with Ada. On the 3rd evening, she finally woke. She opened her eyes to the familiar sight of Fred and George watching over her. "Good evening, brave Miss Tryst," Fred said with a grin, picking up a slice of apple pie from the little table and handing it to her. "Brave but foolish Miss Tryst, would you like a glass of water?" George poured and set a cup down. Ada, starving after so long, drank the water in one gulp, then took the pie and began to eat. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley," she said after finishing. The pie settled comfortably in her stomach. For the first time in days, she felt alive. Fred pushed the Daily Prophet across the pillow toward her. "Look, you're in the paper," he said. George handed her another sandwich. "Not very prominently, though," he added. Ada already knew who Fooley was, but she opened the paper anyway as she ate. She scanned it for her name. No mention of Ada Tryst, not even her surname. George saw her searching and pointed to a small paragraph. A student from Hogwarts assisted the aurors in their capture operation. "Aren't you angry? You nearly died." Fred nudged. "Dumbledore and you trapped him, but your name isn't even in the article." "This is the Daily Prophet. That's why we hate the Ministry," George chimed. Ada wasn't angry. She didn't want the credit. Dumbledore didn't need headlines, and she certainly didn't want the fuss. If anything, she'd rather have something practical, a bag of galleons, perhaps. Fooley was a Death Eater. Even an apprentice like him should be worth a reward, right? "What are you looking for?" George asked when she continued to fumble at the bedside table. "Galleons," Ada said. "I helped the Ministry get results. Don't they give rewards?" Fred laughed. "Don't bother looking. There's nothing on the table but food. No nomination, no reward. Even if the paper didn't print your name, people have guessed it was you," George said. After Fooley's arrest, everyone speculated about which student was involved, but no one at school admitted it. Except you, lying in the hospital didn't help your anonymity. Fred continued. "It's easier to think a first year helped the aurors. Less surprising, less scandal. Now all we need is for you and Dumbledore to nod and confirm it." The idea of being the school's target made Ada uneasy. It wasn't the lack of money, though she'd welcome galleons. It was the attention that worried her. Her body was still fragile. She couldn't afford storms. "Let them guess," she said. "I'm not admitting it. Empty fame is trouble." "If they offered you galleons," Fred joked, "I don't think you'd still be lying here obediently." Then you'd have stormed McGonagall's office by now, George said with a grin. Ada agreed. Of course, I'd demand every galleon I earned, down to the last nut. The twins brightened. Of course, you were greedy for galleons. The new minister has just taken office, and he's already nabbed a hidden Death Eater. He's overjoyed. His speech is the headline, Fred said, flipping pages. All the papers have changed tune, George added. Suddenly they praised the minister, as if they weren't the ones who questioned him before. What if I become minister in the future? Ada said, half joking. Who hadn't secretly hoped for grand things when they were young? Then the ministry will have the shortest-serving, greediest minister ever, the twins retorted. Am I nothing but a greedy miser in your eyes? Ada protested. Fred and George exchanged looks. How about this? A good-looking, greedy miser? George offered, and they both burst out laughing. Ada kept meticulous track of every coin she spent. They loved teasing her about it. If I were minister, I'd promote Mr. Weasley, Adam mused. Senior Undersecretary of the Ministry, perhaps? Fred supplied. Percy would adore you for that, George said mischievously. He might even offer himself up, Fred added. At the mention of Percy, Ada shivered involuntarily. Percy was so different from his brothers. If not for his freckles and red hair, she might have thought he'd been adopted by the Weasleys. No, forget it. For Percy's sake, I can't be minister, she said, pretending to look horrified. Just as their laughter died down and the hospital room settled into a comfortable quiet, Dumbledore stepped in. Albus Dumbledore, who had seemed to appear and disappear like a ghost, was standing not far from the trio. They had no idea when he had arrived or how much he had heard. Ada and the Weasley twins, mid-conversation about the Minister of Magic, greeted him awkwardly, the way you brag to friends and then catch an elder's kindly, amused gaze. It was embarrassing. They had even made fools of themselves in the hospital ward. I'm sorry, Dumbledore said, dressed in a blue robe, bowing slightly. I've been standing here a while. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. Ida and the twins waved him off, insisting it was nothing. When the twins saw Dumbledore, they rose and offered him their chairs. He looked at them kindly. It warms my heart to see how close you are. Friendships formed in youth often last a lifetime, he said with a smile, though his attention lingered mostly on Ida. Out of nowhere, Ida blurted, Fred, George, I want to eat meat. The twins blinked. Weren't they just talking about friendship? Why the sudden craving? Didn't the sandwiches already have meat? They didn't ask. Instead, they accepted her whim and headed for the kitchen. After they left the hospital room, Dumbledore sat in one of the offered chairs and remarked, I was wondering how to get those mischievous Weasley twins to leave, and you managed it in a single sentence. Ida hadn't actually been craving meat. She had sensed Dumbledore wanted to speak to her alone and used a flimsy excuse to send the twins away. What Dumbledore wanted to say, she didn't know. No one could ever be sure of what Dumbledore was thinking. I suppose you have many ways of getting them to go, she said. You just chose not to. Indeed, after all these years, I have a few tricks, Dumbledore admitted. But your method was much more effective. Voluntary departure is the most convincing proof. He nodded toward the tray of treats. May I try some? The snacks had been brought by Ida's friends, Angelina and Alicia, Lee Jordan, Charlie. Dumbledore took a packet of chocolate frogs from the pile. When he opened it, the enchanted frog leaped wildly, but the prepared headmaster prevented its escape. He ate it in 2 or 3 bites and examined the little collectible card. When he saw the picture, he made a face like a child denied his favorite toy. It's me again, he complained and handed the card to Ada. Though it may sound boastful, I seem to have quite a collection of myself. The card read, Albus Dumbledore, current principal of Hogwarts. Widely regarded as the greatest wizard of his time, notable achievements include defeating the dark wizard Grindelwald in 1945, discovering the 12 uses of dragon's blood, distinguished alchemical work with Nicholas Flamel. Professor Dumbledore enjoys chamber music and tenpin bowling. If I add this one, I'll have 4, Ida said, turning the card over. Everyone she knew who collected chocolate frog cards seemed to have several of Dumbledore. She suspected, half-jokingly, that the Chocolate Frog Company might take the headmaster's portrait more than once. I hope my old face hasn't bored you, Dumbledore said with a smile. May I call you Ida, as Minerva does? Of course, Professor. My name's a bit long, she replied. No, not nearly as long as my full name, Dumbledore chuckled. When I put it on forms, I always worry about spelling it correctly. Then, growing more serious, he said, I am very sorry, Ida. Please forgive an old man's overconfidence. It has put you in danger. Ida shook her head. She refused his apology. She felt the danger had been the result of her own choices. This was my fault, she said. If I hadn't gone wandering the castle at night, I wouldn't have met Professor Snape and Fuli. If I hadn't been curious about Fuli's actions, I wouldn't have been noticed. This is on me. I cannot claim to know everything that goes on in this castle, Dumbledore replied. But I have been aware of your movements. I had Severus assigned to watch over you and tacitly approved of your curiosity. Ida had always suspected Snape protected her, but she hadn't understood why until now. Knowing it had been Dumbledore's arrangement brought no grand declarations from her. She accepted being the one guarded. She was the beneficiary and should not be ungrateful. Whenever I wandered, I'd receive summonses from Professor Snape, she said, but I stopped getting them after Fuli left. His resignation was a retreat to advance, Dumbledore said. When he went, everyone relaxed their vigilance. That gave Fuli the opening he needed to take you from the castle. He did not tell her everything. It had been Snape who had eased his watch, which is why she had not been confined later. But thankfully our mischief-making Mr. Weasley, or rather, the twins, discovered the mark you left. They prevented something I would have greatly regretted. Ida still shuddered thinking about being taken into the Forbidden Forest by Fuli and almost losing her life. If she hadn't sensed danger at the last moment, if she hadn't left a mark, or if the twins hadn't found it, she might not be sitting there at all. They saved me, she said softly. Without them, life would be terribly dull. She sighed. The twins always brightened her days. They had shown her that life was more than magic. It was about friends she could trust. A 13-year-old reflecting on the meaning of life might sound ridiculous. What great wisdom could someone so young possess? Dumbledore didn't scoff. He liked that Ida had understood the value of friendship. There is one more thing, he said, nodding at the Daily Prophet lying on the bed. Fudge wanted to put your name in the paper. I refused. Thank you, Professor, Ida said. She couldn't have cared less about that kind of fame. People feared notoriety the way pigs fear getting fat. It brought complications that wasted the time one had. Dumbledore's eyes crinkled with approval. He had not misjudged her. Then he teased. That would be good capital for a future run for Minister of Magic. Are you really going to give that up? It was a joke, Ada replied. No need to be serious. When I was little, someone said I'd end up on Downing Street. I didn't take it seriously then, and neither do I now. Dumbledore was pleased. Despite her youth and recklessness, she had strong, original ideas, something he prized. His task now was to help shape that young mind, to prevent it from growing crooked. Perhaps one day you will be like Minerva, Dean of Gryffindor, he said. How is one dean enough? Perhaps even principal. I'll look forward to that day, Principal Trist, Ida said with a bright, playful grin. Dumbledore only smiled. At his age, he would not squabble over such teasing. It's getting late, he added. The old principal won't keep the new one from resting. We'll see each other tomorrow. There were many things he hadn't said, not yet. Telling her everything now would only bring new burdens. Ada enjoyed the few minutes with Dumbledore so much that she didn't notice a warning she should have. A red danger light flashing somewhere far above her head. 57. May at Hogwarts. Ada stayed in the school hospital for another 3 days. In truth, her body had already healed. She could run and jump and could eat 2 steaks at a sitting, but Madame Pomfrey would not let her out of bed. Even her trips to the bathroom were closely watched. Pomfrey feared Ida might overdo it and cause trouble. The days were unbearably dull. Ida could spend an entire day with only a glass of water, a packet of sweets, and a discarded newspaper for company. She learned the exact number and placement of every little medicine bottle in the hospital. Fortunately, Fred and George were faithful visitors. Whenever they weren't in class, they would arrive without fail. Without them, Ada felt she might have gone moldy. Professor McGonagall came once to chide her. Seeing Ida bouncing in her bed made the Transfiguration professor furious, and offered a stern dressing down that made Ida wish she could shrink into herself. McGonagall refused Ida's request to be discharged, insisting that keeping her confined would allow them to check for any hidden problems and, besides, teach her some discipline. Still, McGonagall felt sorry for her and brought stacks of transfiguration papers and journals to stave off boredom, which turned out to be a perfect remedy. Snape did not visit after that night in the Forbidden Forest. Ida had expected as much. If he'd come, she would have wondered whether she had offended him again. Dumbledore did not visit either, but he did send a small mountain of sweets, all of Ida's favorites, courtesy of an intermediary. One chocolate frog trade turned into a large heap of treats, which Ida considered good business. By then, the excitement over Ida's role in the matter of Fooly had cooled. The more heated discussion in the wizarding world concerned Minister Fudge's decision to send Fooly to Azkaban without a trial and Fooly's family's frantic lobbying to avert punishment. Compared with those scandals, one recovering student was hardly worth gossiping about. On the day she was finally allowed to leave, several friends came, though there wasn't much to carry. Her things had been brought back by a house elf the night before. Her school robe, freshly mended and smelling pleasantly of laundry, and a few books and the last of the snacks she and the twins had been sharing. Angelina, Alicia, and Lee Jordan visited. Fred and George took Ada's pack, and the five of them escorted her back to the Gryffindor common room. Free of the hospital bed, Ada collapsed onto her dormitory mattress with a satisfied groan. A soft bed felt like a little piece of heaven after the stiff mattress in the infirmary. The twins, who had been by her side almost constantly, insisted on showing her the whole castle. The enforced rest had been stifling for Ida and awkward for Fred and George, who clearly needed a chance to stretch their legs. They spent a full day running wild around Hogwarts. Even the humping willow did not escape their mischief. Standing just beyond its swing, Ida and the twins pretended to be mischief makers, throwing stones at the trunk. Whoever hit it won, and if nobody hit it, they judged whose stone landed closest. The willow, proud and prickly, was outraged by the indignity. To prevent any cheating, the twins confiscated Ida's wand. With her weaker arm, Ida stood no chance and lost badly. Fred and George had no intention of yielding and finally scored a clean victory over her. The stakes were high in childish terms. Ida lost 10 chocolate frogs, 5 packets of Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, and 4 licorice wands before the willow's torment finally ended. After that day of indulgence, Ida settled back into a normal rhythm. Relieved of the pressure that had shadowed her since the Fooly affair, she was livelier than before. She decided life was too short to be dour. If she could smile now, she would, rather than regret a future when she couldn't. May had arrived, and the school year was winding down. Professors finished uncompleted courses and began revision. In Transfiguration, McGonagall had them practicing with matches again. Professor Flitwick reviewed the levitation charm. Professor Sprout took the class back into the greenhouses for more hands-on work. Ada emerged from the greenhouse looking like a little mud monkey, a pointed reminder that practical herbology was not her strong suit. She knew the theory inside out, but her practical herbology was sloppy, and that one weak area kept her from earning top marks. Each time Professor Sprout passed, she shook her head sadly. Ada, despite a thick skin elsewhere, really couldn't bear Sprout's disappointed gaze. She felt inexplicably like a heartbreaker. Potions was the odd exception to the general review sessions. Snape continued his usual strict schedule. Reviewing? Not likely. His stance was blunt. He had put everything necessary on the table. Whether students absorbed it was their business. If anyone failed, that was their problem, not his. Yet with Ida he behaved differently. He didn't make things easy in tone. His scowl and barbed remarks were still intact, but he actually gave careful, genuine guidance on her potion work. The sight of the dour potions master taking a real interest in a student left the dungeon classroom in stunned silence. The Gryffindors and Slytherins alike felt as if the sun had risen in the west. Dumbledore had canceled the Defense Against the Dark Arts final, but 5th and 7th years still faced the uncompromising timetable of owls and newts. The castle hummed with the most intense studying of the year. Even Filch's day got much easier. Ida dragged the twins to the library for serious revision. Fred and George were clever, but their heads lived in pranks and schemes rather than study. They grumbled and protested, but they were unwilling to hurt Ida's feelings, and so their resistance stayed verbal. Ida, for her part, was resolved and strict. Mrs. Weasley had treated her kindly when she visited, and Ida wanted the twins to do well for her sake. With one side only half-heartedly resisting and the other ruthlessly determined, the brothers' rebellion fizzled, and they submitted to the regime. The days that followed were miserable for the twins in the worst possible way, filled with study, and Ida kept them to it with steely persistence. 58. Final exam. As June arrived, the most dreaded part of student life descended: final exams. The crash course Ada had organized for the twins ended the night before the exams began. What had started as tutoring for just Fred and George quickly swelled into a study group of all their friends. On the third day, Lee Jordan was forcibly dragged along. Originally, they only wanted him for moral support, but when he couldn't resist teasing the brothers, Fred and George made sure he paid the price. Under Ada's relentless pressure, Lee's face went even darker. He looked completely drained until Angelina and Alicia joined them. With exams looming, the two girls had grown anxious too, and hearing Ada was reviewing with the twins, decided to help. It was like herding two sheep instead of one. Their addition saved Ada a lot of worrying. Angelina and Alicia were excellent students. Ada trusted them enough that they could even help tutor others. The first year's first exam was charms. In the morning, they sat a written paper in a large tiered classroom, the houses arranged in vertical rows so each house filled a column. Ada scanned the questions as soon as the papers were handed out. There was nothing she hadn't prepared for. The paper focused on charm incantations, wand movements, and effects, the exact points Ada had drilled into the twins. She finished quickly, checked her answers twice, and handed the paper in well before most of the others. Before leaving, she made sure to keep an eye on Fred and George. If they blew this exam, she'd consider force-feeding each of them a bottle of wakefulness potion. Her practical was next door with Professor Flitwick. He asked for a levitation charm, a severing charm to split a small wooden block, and a reparo to mend it again. Ada's casting was a fluent sequence of precise movements. Flitwick beamed and rewarded her with a perfect score. Provided her written paper wasn't disastrous, an O for charms was a certainty. History of Magic was a written exam in the afternoon. Ada had always liked history. She'd read many of the books Binns lectured from, and found the dry, dusty facts far more interesting than his monotone commentary, so the paper posed no problem. In the evening, they climbed to the astronomy tower for Professor Sinistra's exam, draw that night's star chart, and name as many important stars as possible. Ada filled every available space with tiny, neatly written names. When she handed her paper in, Professor Sinistra took it and felt a headache coming on at the sight of all those cramped words. She wanted to know how Ada had managed to fit so much on a single sheet. After astronomy, the first years finally got a brief break. 2 exams remained the next day: herbology in the morning and transfiguration in the afternoon. Both had written and practical elements. The herbology practical would be in the greenhouses. Written papers were never an issue for Ada. She'd endured far harsher tests before, but she did worry about the greenhouse work. Sure enough, in the hustle she nicked a plant's stem, sap spilling everywhere. An O in herbology was suddenly in doubt. Transfiguration under Professor McGonagall proved a challenge. McGonagall raised the bar for Ada. While most students transfigured inanimate objects, Ada was asked to transform a mouse. She turned it into an exquisitely carved snuff box, then into a goblet, completing the extra credit portion with finesse. The designs were nearly identical to a demonstration McGonagall had once shown at the orphanage, and Ada had remembered every detail. McGonagall nodded in approval. She was impressed with Ada's skill. By the third day, only potions remained. Flying was compulsory but not examined, and the Defense Against the Dark Arts exam had been canceled, so the students could almost taste freedom. The potions written paper that morning was easy for Ada, but she worried about the twins. Almost none of the questions she'd predicted had appeared. In the afternoon, they brewed a swelling solution individually in the practical. Grades would depend on completion, and on Snape's notoriously subjective judgment. Once potions was over, the twins were finally free of lessons and of Ada's strict tutoring. They celebrated the end of exams the way first years do. Fred, George, and Lee ran around on the grass outside the castle, while the three girls strolled together comparing answers. Angelina and Alicia compared most earnestly, and Ada pointed out any mistakes from the edge. She never understood why people did this after exams. What good did it do to rehash errors now? If you'd done badly, wasn't the point to recover, not dwell? Alicia sounded worried. I think I messed up. Potions and transfiguration, too many mistakes. I'm ruined for the holiday. Me too, Angelina admitted. I'll pass, but my grades won't be great. Ada felt a wave of familiarity. Top students who played modest after a test, only to be the ones making everyone else gnash their teeth when results came out. When Angelina turned to her, Ada didn't bother with false humility. Except for herbology, Ada said. Everything else should be O. Herbology might be an A. The two girls sighed with envy. If I did that well, my parents would double my pocket money, Alicia said. If I got those marks, I could get a nicer broom next term and maybe get on the house team, Angelina added. Ada smiled. I'm jealous of you too. Brooms obey you, mine only seem to want to sweep the floor. Good thing flying's not an exam, otherwise you'd have a T on your report card, Angelina joked. A T? Are you saying Ada is a troll? The twins called back as they ran over. So you want a taste of a troll's headbutt? Ada said, mock threatening. The twins darted away, shouting, Catch us if you can, and wheel. You two stop right now. Today you pay. Ada chased after them, laughter in her voice. Under warm sunlight, the three of them ran and tumbled on the lawn, the first year at Hogwarts ending on that bright, carefree afternoon. 59. End of the year. After the finals, Esmeralda finally relaxed. She spent her days horsing around with the twins, playing until she was exhausted, and her nights exploring secret passages, carefree and utterly off guard. She checked her system now and then. It had helped her a lot but rarely interfered with her life, so quiet she nearly forgot it existed. With the school year over, the system ran its inventory for her first year. The display scrolled up in that blunt, familiar voice Esmeralda had long since learned to tolerate. Name, Esmeralda Twister. Gender, female. Age 13, height 5'1", about 154.5 centimeters. Weight, 86 pounds, about 39 kilograms. With a little more effort, she'd be market ready. Wand, U, Phoenix Feather Core, 10th coordinates. Occupation, Hogwarts student, first year. Proficient subjects, transfiguration, charms, potions. The host is a bit biased. Talents, magic reserve, already exceeds that of an ordinary adult wizard. No longer cannon fodder, but still weak. Good at learning, quick to pick up both good and bad habits. Sympathy, doesn't the host want to learn some new skills? Strongly recommends Art of Manipulation and Two-Faced Tactics, two peerless secret manuals. Recklessness, acts on impulse or anger, chance of double casting. Esmeralda scowled at the last line. She hated, more than anything, those three words, chance of. In her short life, anything labeled with a chance had become a source of blood and tears. Luck and character were too insubstantial to rely on. They could sweeten things, but not rescue you when it mattered most. The system also evaluated the spells she knew. Lumos, proficient. She said, let there be light, and there was light. Stupefy, the disarming charm, and the blasting hex were basically mastered. Rarely used spells were at least at the novice level. Toward the end of the list, though, Esmeralda froze. There were 3 spells she had never actively learned. Killing Curse, roughly understood, other people's green light ends a life. Hers seems to cause 2 streams of nosebleed. Crucio, roughly understood, for her a thumb clamp would probably be more effective. Imperio, roughly understood, the system recommends she study love potions instead. The success rate is higher. It was the system's familiar, merciless sniping. A helper that didn't give tasks could at least be a little kinder, she thought. But she couldn't deny a truth wrapped in sarcasm. She had never intentionally learned the unforgivables. She had no access to those books. The system had probably copied the entries over after Fooley had used them on her one too many times. The advantage of the system was that if a spell appeared on it, she could cast it. The catch was that the spell's effectiveness depended on her strength and her emotions. Stupefy could either topple someone or put them out cold for hours, depending on her mastery. The unforgivable curses needed not only magical power, but also a very particular emotional drive. Even if she could technically form them, she wouldn't reach Fuli or the Death Eater's level anytime soon. The system was blunt and mean, but mostly true. On the last day of term, the exam results finally arrived. The common room's cheerful buzz fell away into groans and wails. As Esmeralda had expected, herbology had given her an E. Every other subject was an O. She murmured a private prayer to Merlin that Professor Sprout would live forever. The twins' grades were decent, all passing, some O's, and they grinned like madmen, glad they wouldn't get a lecture from Mrs. Weasley over the holidays. Angelina and Alicia had done better than they'd thought and were already debating broomstick brands. The worst report went to Lee Jordan, who had barely passed anything. Even after getting his parchment, people still pretended to hold their breaths for him. Early romance, or at least crushing, was terribly distracting, everyone agreed. All week, Esmeralda kept running into Severus Snape in the corridors. It felt as if she were stalking him. He met her with that tight, unreadable expression every time, lips pursed like he had something to say and couldn't quite force it out. Until tonight, at the year-end feast, he still said nothing. Esmeralda and the twins descended to the Great Hall for the banquet to find it already thrumming with conversation. Students talked loudly about holiday plans. The hall was trimmed in green and silver, Slytherin's colors, and although Dumbledore had yet to announce the House Cup, everyone was certain Slytherin had it in the bag. A massive banner of a coiled serpent hung over the high table. Slytherin had dominated the cup for years. This was their 5th straight victory. Snape sat at the staff table, pale face positively beaming. If he weren't constraining himself, he might soar into the air. Hogwarts would have a new landmark, the old bat flying above the castle, the students joked. When Dumbledore finally stood, the clamor stilled. "Another year has passed," he said, cheerful as ever. "Before you eat, indulge an old man's dull speech. I hope your little brains have grown richer with knowledge this year. A whole summer awaits you to properly digest what you've learned. Now, as far as I know, we must proceed with the House Cup ceremony. The scores are as follows. 4th place, Gryffindor, 404 points. 3rd place, Hufflepuff, 410 points. Ravenclaw, 446 points. Slytherin, 482 points. A roar erupted from the Slytherin table. Snape clapped so hard his knuckles went red. Gryffindor sat in stony silence. They had bowed out early from the race and lost badly at Quidditch. For them, it had been a dismal year. Professor McGonagall applauded with the rest of the staff, but everyone knew she had wanted, desperately, to wrest the cup away from Slytherin. The gap, 78 points, was simply too wide. "Everyone performed very well, especially Slytherin," Dumbledore said. "Let us congratulate Slytherin on winning this year's House Cup." There was no dramatic twist, no last-minute reversal. Slytherin erupted into wild celebration, the noise so intense it felt like an explosion. The other 3 houses offered polite applause. They'd seen this happen 5 years running and still hoped for a hero to finally topple the serpent. After the feast, Professor McGonagall handed out notices to everyone, warning sternly against using magic during the holidays. Fred Weasley toyed with the temptation to tear his up, but under McGonagall's tyrannical stare, he folded the parchment and walked away. Esmeralda didn't empty her wardrobe completely. She planned to take only a few outfits home and leave room in her trunk for next year. When she opened her suitcase, though, she found a small leather pouch tucked in the lining. It wasn't hers, but stitched on the flap were the words, Esmeralda EJT. Inside lay a neat pile of galleons, 30, maybe 40. Her fingers trembled a little as she held the pouch. Someone had slipped money into her things. The name on the pouch matched her initials, and for the first time all night a question buzzed where there had been laughter and lights. Who would give her this? Professor McGonagall? Dumbledore? Or the ever-annoying Professor Snape? 60. Where is Ada going? The next morning, Esmeralda went straight to Professor McGonagall and handed over the galleons. Once bitten, twice shy. Even though her name had been on the trunk, she was still uneasy about finding a pouch of money inside. Professor McGonagall examined the leather purse and the coins carefully. There was nothing wrong with them. No curses, no prank, no telltale signs of foul play. Judging by the name on the pouch, the money was intended for Esmeralda. It wasn't a fortune, but it would certainly ease her desperate finances. Still, McGonagall confiscated the galleons for the time being. It was better, she said, not to spend money of uncertain origin. She would return it once she had traced where it had come from. After leaving McGonagall's office, Esmeralda went to see the Weasley twins. They were leaving Hogwarts today. No students were allowed to remain at school during the summer, so Esmeralda had to return to the orphanage. She had no fondness for the place beyond Mrs. Mary, no attachments to keep her there. But she had no choice. She promised herself that once she had enough money, she would get her own home, even if it meant paying a mortgage. On the way to the station, she told the twins about the galleons and her suspicions. Fred and George were certain it had come from Dumbledore. He had kept the Daily Prophet from publishing Esmeralda's name. This must be his private help. The idea that Snape had left the money was dismissed out of hand. The twins said Snape had neither reason nor conscience to do so. Esmeralda decided not to worry about it for now. The coins weren't in her possession, and Professor McGonagall was looking into it. On the train, 6 of them squeezed into a compartment, the twins and Lee Jordan on one side, Esmeralda and 2 other girls on the other. They played cards and chatted the whole way, just as they had when they first came to Hogwarts. The countryside outside grew greener and neater. Towns began to blur into suburbs. As the scenery turned more urban, they changed out of wizarding robes into muggle clothes. At King's Cross, the platform echoed with farewells. The guard at the partition let only a few students through at a time, so a crowd didn't pour into the muggle station all at once. Esmeralda and the twins walked through together. Mrs. Weasley was waiting with Ron and Ginny. She waved and called out to Esmeralda and the twins. "My dear, you must come visit during the holidays. I'll have Arthur pick you up," she told Esmeralda, smiling warmly and seemingly ignoring her own sons. "Mom, Esmeralda isn't your daughter. Ginny's standing right here," the twins protested, a little put out. "We're your sons, and we haven't seen you in half a year," they complained. But Mrs. Weasley only hugged Esmeralda as if she were a daughter and left the twins to grumble. "Thank you for the invitation," Esmeralda said. "I'd love to see what life in a wizarding household is like." She couldn't linger. She still had to cross half of London to get back to the orphanage. Dragging her suitcase, she took Muggle transport to the neighborhood she remembered. After a year away, the streets felt oddly unfamiliar. But she followed the path she knew. She'd walked it for years. It couldn't be wrong. When she reached the spot where the orphanage stood, her heart stopped. The orphanage was gone. "Where's my orphanage? Where's my big orphanage?" she muttered, checking that she hadn't missed a turn. She rubbed her eyes, but there was no playing tricks. Only rubble remained. A handful of nearby houses had been torn down too, and a crew of workers loitered among the ruins. The block had been cleared some time ago to make way for a commercial development. It was hard not to feel a bitter twist in her chest. The orphanage had sheltered her through rain and cold. Even if she hadn't loved it, it had been home. It was getting late, and she couldn't stay in the wreckage. After one last look, she pulled her suitcase and walked to the next block. She ducked into a tiny, cheap coffee shop she'd been to once or twice before. The place drew locals. Folks talked about football and other small things. Esmeralda sat in a corner with a pie and listened, but there was nothing useful until a familiar voice spoke beside her. "Esmeralda Twister?" the man said. She looked up. The face and voice were familiar. "Mr. Kirk?" she asked uncertainly. "It's me," he smiled. He glanced at her suitcase. "Have you just come back?" "Yes, school's out for summer, but when I came back, the orphanage was demolished." Mr. Kirk took a pen from his pocket and scrawled on a napkin. The orphanage block was knocked down after Christmas. They're building a commercial district. The neighborhood's not wealthy, a risky project, but that's why they cleared it. "Where's Mrs. Mary?" Esmeralda asked. "She and Harry were moved to another orphanage. It's in the countryside near Surrey. Much better conditions." He handed her the napkin with the address. "Mrs. Mary couldn't reach you, so she asked people around here to pass the address along if they saw you." Esmeralda frowned at the neat, unfamiliar writing. She hadn't given Mrs. Mary any contact information. She'd only asked Mr. Weasley to post a letter at Christmas and had been too busy with school to write. She didn't want to tell a nun about being a witch. She'd thought it would worry the older woman. "Do you want me to take you there?" Mr. Kirk offered. "I've been." "No, that's kind of you, but I'll take the train myself," Esmeralda said. He checked his watch and warned that it was getting late. "If you're on your own, it might be better to go in the morning." "I'll stay with a classmate tonight," she promised. After saying goodbye to Mr. Kirk, Esmeralda bought an envelope and stamps. She had no immediate plans to go to Surrey, but she wanted Mrs. Mary to know she was safe. She wrote and mailed a short note, then pulled her suitcase back onto the street as dusk slid over the city. Where to stay for the night? For a witch without a home, a familiar thought rose up: the leaky cauldron. It looked shabby from the outside, but it had been her first stop in the wizarding world, the place where everything had started. It was where she had first seen a larger world, where she had first met McGonagall. The orphanage was gone, with nothing left to return to. All that remained was to move forward. Perhaps, Esmeralda thought, that was fate's strange, merciful arrangement.